Some legends never truly die. They linger in forgotten temples, whisper through ancient tombs, and wait in the shadows for souls ambitious enough to seek them out. Long before the Galactic Empire, before Darth Vader's mechanical breathing echoed through Star Destroyer corridors, before Darth Sidious manipulated senates and corrupted chosen ones, there walked a Sith Lord whose power was so immense that his very spirit refused to fade even after death claimed his body. This is the story of Exar Kun, a tale of how the brightest light can cast the darkest shadow. Around 4,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the galaxy existed in a fragile state of peace. The Jedi Order stood as guardians of the Republic, their temples on Ossus and Dantooine serving as beacons of wisdom and training grounds for Force-sensitive younglings from across known space. The Great Wars with the ancient Sith Empire had passed into memory, reduced to cautionary tales told to Padawans about the dangers of the dark side. But history has a way of repeating itself, and the seeds of darkness are never truly extinguished. They merely wait, dormant, for the right conditions to bloom again. The Republic of this era was vast and prosperous. Core worlds thrived with trade and culture. The Jedi moved freely among the populations they protected, respected, and admired for their dedication to peace and justice. There were threats, certainly. Pirates plagued the Outer Rim. Local conflicts flared between rival systems. But nothing suggested the coming storm, the war that would shake the foundations of both the Republic and the Jedi Order itself. This was a time when the Jedi Order was perhaps at its most confident. They had faced the darkness before and emerged victorious. The names of ancient Sith Lords like Naga Sadow and Frida Nad were studied as historical curiosities, threats that had been overcome and relegated to the past. The tombs on Korriban stood silent and seemingly powerless. The jungle moon of Yavin 4 held secrets buried beneath vines and centuries of growth, secrets the Jedi believed would never again trouble the galaxy. They were wrong. In this era of relative peace, the Jedi trained their students in traditional ways. Masters took Padawans, teaching them to channel the Force, to wield lightsabers, to serve others before themselves. The training was rigorous but compassionate, designed to mold Force sensitives into disciplined guardians who could resist the seductions of power. Most students succeeded. They learned patience, humility, and the danger of letting emotions rule their actions. But every generation produces exceptional students, those whose potential burns so bright it can either illuminate the galaxy or consume it entirely. On one of the core worlds, a child was born with an unprecedented connection to the Force. Even as an infant, objects would move when he cried. Lights would flicker when he laughed. His parents recognized quickly that their son was special, different in ways they couldn't fully understand. When Jedi representatives arrived at their home, explaining that their child was Force-sensitive and could join the Order, they made the difficult decision that countless parents before them had made. They gave their son to the Jedi, hoping he would grow into a hero, a protector. They named him Exar Kun. Young Exar was brought to the Jedi training grounds on Dantooine, a world of grasslands and ancient structures, a place where the Force flowed strong and clear. From his earliest days as a youngling, Exar demonstrated abilities that set him apart from his peers. He learned faster than others. His connection to the Force felt deeper, more instinctive. While other children struggled to lift small objects with their minds, Exar moved multiple items simultaneously with apparent ease. His instructors noted his potential with equal measures of excitement and concern. As Exar progressed through his early training, certain personality traits began to emerge. He was competitive, driven by an intense need not just to succeed, but to excel beyond all others. When sparring with practiced sabers, he wouldn't stop at victory but would push further, demonstrating his superiority. When solving problems or puzzles, that tested a student's connection to the Force. Exar needed to be first with the answer, needed everyone to see his accomplishment. This pride worried his teachers, but they also recognized his genuine talent. The question became, could they channel his ambition into service, or would his pride become his undoing? The Jedi Council debated what to do with this exceptional but troubling student. Some argued for assigning him to a strict master, who would curb his arrogance through discipline. Others suggested a gentler approach, believing compassion might reach him where harsh rules could not. In the end, they chose a master who represented something different entirely. They chose Vodosiusk Bas. Vodosiusk Bas was unlike most Jedi Masters in both appearance and philosophy. A member of the Krevaki species, he possessed multiple tentacle-like appendages and moved with an alien grace that humans found initially unsettling. But his physical differences were insignificant compared to the uniqueness of his mind. Bas was a scholar and historian, a Jedi who had spent decades studying the ancient texts, learning the history of conflicts between light and dark. He was also a master of an unusual weapon for a Jedi. He wielded a quarterstaff, a simple wooden weapon that he imbued with the Force, making it as effective as any lightsaber in his skilled tentacles. Master Bas accepted Exar Kun as his Padawan, with full awareness of the challenge ahead. He had read the reports, seen the evaluations, understood the risks. But Bas believed that Exar's hunger for knowledge could be redirected, that his competitive nature could be transformed into a drive for wisdom rather than personal glory. The old Krevaki master saw potential in Exar that went beyond raw power. He saw intelligence, curiosity, and a mind capable of grasping the deepest mysteries of the Force. If properly guided, Bas believed, Exar Kun could become one of the greatest Jedi of the age. Their training together began on Dantooine, in the academy Bas had established for exceptional students. The curriculum was unlike standard Jedi training. Bas didn't simply teach forms and meditation techniques. He educated his students in history, in philosophy, in understanding the broader context of the Force and the Jedi's role in the galaxy. He challenged them with questions that had no easy answers, forcing them to think rather than simply obey. For most students, this approach opened their minds. For Exar Kun, it awakened something more dangerous, a belief that he could understand things his master did not, that wisdom and power were his to claim if he just pushed hard enough. Exar proved to be everything Bas had hoped and feared. In lightsaber combat, he excelled beyond his years, mastering Form 5, Gem So, with its aggressive counters and overwhelming strikes. He learned Jarkai, the technique of wielding two blades simultaneously, demonstrating ambidexterity and coordination that left his fellow Padawans in awe. When Bas tested him with the quarterstaff, Exar adapted quickly, understanding how the weapon's reach and balance could be exploited. Their practice duels became legendary among the students, with Exar pushing his master harder each time, always seeking to finally best him in combat. But it was Exar's ability with the Force itself that truly distinguished him. He could sense things others missed, emotions, intentions, the subtle flows of energy through living things. His telekinesis was precise and powerful. He could influence minds with surprising ease, though Bas warned him repeatedly about the ethical implications of such abilities. Exar absorbed every lesson, every technique, every piece of knowledge his master shared. And then, as Bas watched with growing concern, Exar began to seek knowledge his master had not offered. Among the other students training under Vodosiusk Bas were Crado and Silvar, a mated pair from Cathar. Crado was human, intelligent and thoughtful, while Silvar was Cathar, fierce and passionate, with the leonine features and claws of her species. They represented everything Exar was not, patient, humble, content to learn at their own pace, without needing to surpass everyone around them. This made them natural rivals in Exar's mind, though they never sought competition with him. One training session would reveal the depths of Exar's issues and foreshadow his ultimate fall. During a sparring match, Silvar managed to land a strike against Exar, her claws raking across his face and leaving visible marks. In that instant, as pain and humiliation flooded through him, Exar's control shattered. Rage erupted from somewhere deep within him, and he attacked Silvar with an intensity that went far beyond training. His strikes became brutal, his face twisted with fury. He would have seriously injured or killed her if Master Boss hadn't intervened, using the Force to separate them and restrain his Padawan. The aftermath of that incident hung heavy over the academy. Silvar had confronted Exar not with fear, but with disappointment, telling him plainly that he was no true Jedi, that his anger and pride had corrupted whatever good he might have possessed. Her words cut deeper than her claws had. Vodosyask Bas took his apprentice aside, trying to reach through Exar's defensive pride to the part of him that might still listen to wisdom. The master explained that anger was natural, that all beings felt it, but that giving in to anger, letting it control your actions, that was the path to darkness. Exar listened, or seemed to, but inside he resented the lecture, resented being made to feel ashamed when he believed he had only been defending himself. In the quiet hours after that confrontation, alone in his quarters, Exar's mind churned with conflicting emotions. Part of him recognized that his master was right, that he had lost control and nearly committed an act he would forever regret. But another part, a part that grew louder with each passing day, whispered different truths. It said that his anger had made him strong, that in that moment of pure rage, he had been more powerful than ever before. It suggested that perhaps the Jedi teachings about controlling emotions were not wisdom, but limitation, chains meant to prevent Jedi from reaching their true potential. These dangerous thoughts led Exar to begin exploring areas of knowledge that Master Boss kept restricted. One night, driven by curiosity and the arrogant belief that he deserved access to all knowledge, Exar broke into his master's private chambers. There, among the carefully organized scrolls and ancient texts, he found what he had been seeking, a Jedi holocron containing information about the Sith. Not the species itself, which had long ago been absorbed into human bloodlines, but the philosophy, the teachings, the dark side techniques that ancient Dark Lords had developed over millennia. As Exar activated the holocron, the gatekeeper appeared, a holographic representation of a long-dead Jedi Master who had studied the Sith to better understand how to fight them. The gatekeeper was designed to test those who accessed the holocron, to ensure that knowledge of darkness was only shared with those strong enough to resist its seduction. But Exar, brilliant and confident, navigated the gatekeeper's challenges with ease. He spoke the right words, gave the appropriate responses, all while internally absorbing information about Sith alchemy, about Force lightning, about techniques that could dominate minds and drain life itself. The holocron spoke of ancient Sith Lords, who had wielded power beyond anything the current Jedi Order could imagine. It told of Naga Sado, who had caused stars to go supernova with rituals and Sith artifacts. It described Freedon Nad, a fallen Jedi who had discovered immortality of spirit, whose influence had persisted for centuries after his physical death. It revealed the locations of Sith tombs on Korriban and temples on worlds like Yavin 4, places where dark side energy had concentrated, where knowledge and power waited for those brave or foolish enough to seek them. Master Boss discovered Exar's transgression almost immediately. The Force itself seemed to carry the taint of dark knowledge through the academy, and Vodosyask Bas recognized it for what it was. He confronted his Padawan with sorrow more than anger, asking why Exar had betrayed his trust, why he had sought out dangerous knowledge that could corrupt him. Exar's response revealed how far he had already drifted from Jedi teachings. He argued that all knowledge should be available to those strong enough to handle it, that hiding information about the Sith only made the Jedi weaker, less prepared to face darkness when it inevitably arose. The argument between master and apprentice stretched into hours. Boss tried every approach he knew, speaking of the subtle nature of corruption, how darkness didn't announce itself with fanfare, but crept into the soul gradually, justifying itself with logic and pride. He reminded Exar of his recent loss of control with Silver, pointing out that rage had nearly made him kill a fellow student. What would happen, Boss asked, if Exar coupled that anger with dark side techniques designed to enhance emotion, to channel hatred into power? Could Exar truly believe he would remain in control, remain himself, if he continued down this path? But Exar Kun, for all his intelligence and Force sensitivity, had one critical flaw that would prove his undoing. He was absolutely convinced of his own exceptional nature. In his mind, the rules that applied to others, the warnings that protected weaker beings from corruption, did not apply to him. He would be different. He would study the darkness, understand it, even use it if necessary, all while remaining in perfect control. The dark side would be his tool, not his master. This belief, this arrogant certainty, made him deaf to his master's concerns. The relationship between Vodosiusk Bas and Exar Kun deteriorated rapidly after that night. The trust that had existed between them, already strained, now lay shattered. Bas continued trying to reach his Padawan, to guide him back from the dangerous precipice on which he balanced, but Exar had begun to see his master differently. No longer the wise teacher, Bas now appeared to Exar as an obstacle, someone who wanted to limit his potential out of fear or jealousy. The irony of this perspective, that Exar was now seeing his caring mentor through a lens of paranoia and suspicion, was lost on the young man whose pride had begun to poison his judgment. In his continued private studies, Exar learned more about the history of Jedi who had fallen to the dark side. He read about the Second Great Schism, when a faction of Jedi had broken away thousands of years earlier to pursue forbidden practices, eventually finding the Sith species and becoming the Dark Lords of the ancient Sith Empire. He discovered accounts of Friedan Nad's journey from frustrated Jedi apprentice to Sith King of Onderon. Each story fed his growing conviction that the Jedi Order's restrictions were arbitrary, that power and knowledge were being deliberately kept from those who deserved them most. The final breaking point came when Exar decided to declare himself a Jedi Knight, without receiving official recognition from the Council. In his mind, he had surpassed the typical requirements for knighthood. His skills exceeded most knights already serving the Order. His understanding of the Force went deeper than the surface-level teachings most Jedi settled for. Why should he wait for some ceremonial acknowledgement when he had already achieved the substance of knighthood? Master Boss tried to explain that the patience required to wait, the humility required to accept, that others must validate your growth. These were themselves crucial lessons, but Exar heard only more attempts to hold him back. With bitter words exchanged and hearts hardened on both sides, Exar Kun made his decision. He would leave the Jedi Order, not in disgrace, but in disgust at its limitations. He would seek the knowledge that the Jedi hoarded and feared. He would find the power that ancient Sith Lords had wielded, and he would prove that he was strong enough to use that power without being consumed by it. Master Boss watched his most promising and most troubled student depart, feeling the heavy weight of failure settling on his shoulders. He reached out through the Force, one final time, trying to sense if there was any way to reach Exar, any words that might turn him back. But the response he felt sent chills through his alien physiology. Exar Kun's presence in the Force had already begun to change. darkening around the edges like a photograph exposed to too much light, burning at the center where his pride burned brightest. As Exar Kun departed Dantooine aboard his personal ship, the Starstorm One, he felt not regret, but exhilaration. Finally, he was free to pursue his destiny, without the constraints of fearful masters and their limiting philosophies. His readings in the Forbidden Holocron had mentioned Onderon, a world in the Japrail sector where Freedon Nad had once ruled. The planet had a dark history, with a conflict between the walled city of Izzes and beast riders in the wilderness, a struggle that Freedon Nad had exploited and manipulated for his own purposes. More importantly, the holocron suggested that Nad's tomb had been moved to Onderon's jungle moon, Di Shun, after his power had finally been broken by the Jedi. If Exar wanted to understand true Sith knowledge, to learn from a master who wouldn't limit him out of fear, what better teacher than the spirit of an ancient Dark Lord? The journey to Onderon took several days, giving Exar time to reflect on his decision and plan his approach. He decided to pose as a Jedi archaeologist, someone with academic interest in Freedon Nad and the history of the Sith on Onderon. This cover story would give him legitimacy and hopefully access to information about Nad's relocated tomb. As his ship entered the Onderon system, passing the massive gas giant Onderon orbited, Exar felt a presence touch his mind. Something old, something hungry, something that had been waiting for someone exactly like him. Onderon itself was a world of contradictions, beautiful from orbit, with blue oceans and green continents, but turbulent in its atmosphere and violent in its ecosystem. The moon Dachun hung close in the sky, so close that during parts of Onderon's orbit, the atmospheres of world and moon actually connected, allowing the fierce predators of Di Chun to migrate to Onderon's surface. This created the beast rider culture, people who had learned to tame and ride Onderon's dangerous creatures as protection against even more dangerous predators. The capital city, Izzes, stood as a fortress against the wilderness, its massive walls testament to centuries of conflict between civilization and the wild. When Exar landed in Izzes, he found the world still recovering from recent conflicts. The Jedi had been here not long ago, dealing with a resurgence of Freedon Nad's followers in what had been called the Nadist Uprising. King Omen, one of Nad's descendants, had been corrupted by the ancient Sith Lord's spirit and had attempted to recreate a dark side kingdom. The Jedi, led by Master Arkajeth, had intervened, defeated Omen, and finally banished Nad's spirit from Onderon, or so they believed. In the aftermath, they had moved Nad's sarcophagus and those of his corrupted followers to Daeshun, sealing them in a tomb made of Mandalorian iron, supposedly impregnable, and secured in a remote location where dark side energies would trouble no one. Exar presented himself to the Jedi, who remained on Onderon, supervising the transformation of Nad's old flagship into a Jedi outpost. Jedi Knights Kai Keldroma and Tot Donita received him cordially at first, fellow Jedi helping a supposed colleague with his research. But when Exar expressed particular interest in the Sith artifacts that had been collected from King Omen's vault, artifacts that contained dark side power and dangerous knowledge, the mood shifted. The artifacts, they explained, were being sent to the Great Jedi Library on Assus for secure storage and study. They would not be available for Exar to examine. Before the situation could escalate, Master Arkajeth himself arrived. The Arcanian Jedi Master was renowned throughout the Order for his wisdom and his particular expertise in battling dark side influence. One look at Exar, one moment of examining him through the Force, and Arkajeth understood exactly what he was dealing with. This was no innocent researcher. This was a Jedi who had been touched by darkness, who carried with him the taint of forbidden knowledge and dangerous ambition. Arca confronted Exar directly, cutting through his false pretenses and warning him about the path he had chosen. The The dark side, Arca explained with the authority of someone who had fought it throughout his long life, did not offer power. It offered slavery. Those who thought they could use it while remaining in control were deluding themselves, and history was littered with the tragic remains of brilliant Jedi who had made exactly that mistake. Exar, faced with his deception being revealed and his access to the artifacts denied, felt rage building inside him. These Jedi were just like Vodosiask Bas, hiding knowledge, claiming it was for his own good, while really trying to keep him weak, to prevent him from surpassing them. He wanted to lash out, to show Master Arca exactly how much power he had already mastered. But even through his anger, some instinct for self-preservation held him back. Attacking Jedi Masters on Onderon, in the heart of their current operations, would end with him captured or killed. He needed to be smarter than that. Exar departed Iziz without the artifacts he had wanted, but with something potentially more valuable: information about the location of Freeden Nad's tomb on Diexund. The Jedi had been careful not to publicize the exact location, but Exar had ways of learning what he needed. In the markets and cantinas of Iziz, he asked careful questions, spoke to the right people, and eventually found 2 individuals who could help him. Nebo and Rask were treasure hunters, the sort of men who made their living finding valuable items in dangerous places and selling them to collectors who didn't ask too many questions. They had been among those who had helped to transport Freeden Nad's sarcophagus to Dietshun, and for the right price, they would guide Exar there. The journey from Onderon to Dietshun could only be made when the moon's orbit brought it close enough for atmospheric connection. Even then, it was dangerous. Diexan was a nightmare world, a moon where evolution had been driven entirely by the principle of survival of the most violent. Everything on Diexan wanted to kill everything else. The creatures that lived there were predators so fierce they made Onderon's beasts seem tame by comparison. The jungle was dense and hostile, with plants that were themselves carnivorous, air that was thick with spores and aggressive insects, and a general atmosphere of malevolence that made even experienced hunters nervous. Nebo and Rask led Exar through Dieshun's jungles with visible reluctance. They were being paid well, but money meant nothing if you were dead, and every shadow could conceal something deadly. Exar, despite never having visited this moon before, felt oddly comfortable. The dark side of the Force was strong here, concentrated by decades of Freeden Nad's presence and the ancient conflicts that had taken place when Nad had ruled Onderon. For someone who had begun to open himself to the dark side, Dieshan felt almost welcoming, as if the moon itself recognized in Exar a kindred spirit. They found the tomb in a clearing where nothing grew, where even Dieshun's aggressive flora seemed to avoid the ground. The structure was exactly as the Jedi had described it: walls of Mandalorian iron, nearly indestructible, covered with Jedi wards designed to contain dark side energy. The entrance was sealed with mechanisms that should have been impossible to breach, without heavy equipment and days of work. But Exar Kun had something the Jedi hadn't anticipated. He wanted in, and he was willing to embrace the very darkness the tomb contained to achieve his goal. Igniting his blue lightsaber, Exar began to cut into the Mandalorian iron. The metal resisted at first, designed to withstand even lightsaber strikes, but as Exar channeled more of the Force through his weapon, as he let anger and determination fuel his efforts, the blade began to bite deeper. Hour after hour he worked, sweat pouring down his face, arms aching from the sustained effort. Nebo and Rask watched nervously, ready to flee at the first sign of danger. Finally, with a sound like tortured metal screaming, the wall gave way. A section fell inward, and cold air rushed out, carrying with it the unmistakable presence of death and dark side power. Exar entered the tomb alone, leaving the treasure hunters outside, where they nervously kept watch for the predators that prowled Diekshun's jungles. Inside, the air was cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. This was the chill of the dark side, of spaces where light and life had been deliberately excluded. The tomb's interior was surprisingly spacious, with a main chamber containing 3 sarcophagi, Frida Nads at the center, flanked by those of King Omen and Queen Amanoa. Around the chamber, smaller alcoves held Sith artifacts, items of power that the Jedi had collected and sealed away. Dark side energy radiated from every surface, making the very air feel thick and oppressive. As Exar approached Friedan Nad's sarcophagus, the temperature plummeted further. His breath became visible in the suddenly frigid air. And then, with a sound like a whisper and a scream combined, Friedan Nad's spirit materialized before him. The ghost appeared as Nad had looked in his prime, tall, powerful, with eyes that burned with dark side fire. For 300 years, Nad's spirit had endured, waiting for an opportunity to return to physical form, to continue his interrupted quest for ultimate power. And now, standing before him, was exactly the sort of apprentice he needed. Friedan Nad's spirit spoke Exar's name, with a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. He told Exar he had been waiting, that he had felt the young Jedi's arrival on Diekshun the moment his ship entered the moon's atmosphere. Every word Nad spoke resonated with Exar, because they addressed his deepest beliefs and frustrations. The ancient Sith Lord's spirit circled him, studying him with eyes that seemed to see through flesh, to the soul beneath. Nad spoke of Exar's potential, of power that dwarfed anything the Jedi could offer, of secrets that would make him a legend echoing through the ages. All Exar had to do was accept Nad as his teacher, embrace the teachings of the Sith, and take the final steps away from the light that still, just barely, remained within him. Exar hesitated, but only briefly. He had come too far, burned too many bridges, to turn back now. Besides, he told himself, accepting Nad's knowledge didn't mean accepting his control. Exar would learn what the ancient Sith Lord had to teach, take the power that was offered, and then go his own way. He would not be Nad's apprentice in the way the Sith tradition demanded. He would be Nad's student temporarily, just long enough to gain what he needed. Once again, Exar's arrogance made him believe he could use darkness without being used by it. Friedan Nad's spirit directed Exar to a hidden compartment beneath his own remains. There, wrapped in cloth that had somehow survived 3 centuries without decay, were scrolls containing Sith teachings. These weren't the second-hand accounts Exar had read in the Jedi holocron. These were original texts, written in the Sith language, containing techniques and rituals that had been practiced by Dark Lords when the Sith Empire had controlled vast regions of space. As Exar lifted the scrolls, he felt their weight in his hands and the weight of the choice he was making. The point of no return had come and passed. He was no longer a fallen Jedi exploring forbidden knowledge. He was now a student of the Sith. Nad's spirit instructed Exar to take the scrolls and translate them using electronic equipment on his ship. The ancient Sith language was complex, but with the right programs, Exar would be able to decode the texts and begin his real education. But first, Nad told him, he needed to journey to Korriban, the ancient homeworld of the Sith Empire. There, in the tombs that housed the remains of the most powerful Dark Lords in history, Exar would be tested. If he survived those trials, if he proved himself worthy, then he would be ready to learn the deepest secrets Nad could teach. As Exar emerged from the tomb, scrolls in hand, Nebo and Rask realized immediately that something had changed about the young Jedi. His eyes held a different light, or perhaps a different darkness. When they demanded he share whatever treasures he had found inside, Exar's response came without thought or hesitation. His hand extended, and invisible force energy erupted from his palm. The 2 treasure hunters were lifted off their feet, their cries of terror cut short as Exar's power crushed the life from them. They fell to the jungle floor as corpses, Their usefulness expired, their knowledge of what had transpired here a potential liability Exar could not accept. Standing over the bodies of the men he had just killed, Exar waited for some response from within himself. Guilt, horror, regret. But he felt only a cold satisfaction. They had gotten what they deserved for their greed. Besides, he told himself, they had been criminals, treasure hunters who would have robbed the tomb themselves if they could have breached it. He had done the galaxy a favor by removing such parasites. These justifications came easily, more easily than Exar would have liked if he had been honest with himself. But self-honesty was becoming increasingly difficult as the dark side began its subtle work of reshaping his thoughts and perceptions. Exar returned to the Star Storm 1 and immediately began the work of translating the Sith Scrolls. The electronic translator he had installed worked slowly, processing the ancient language through linguistic databases and producing rough translations that Exar then had to interpret based on context and his growing understanding of Sith philosophy. What he learned both thrilled and disturbed him. The scrolls described techniques for extending life through dark side rituals, methods for creating monsters using Sith alchemy, ways to drain Force energy from living beings to enhance one's own power. The Sith, he discovered, had not simply been an evil parallel to the Jedi. They had developed an entire framework of Force understanding based on fundamentally different premises about power, about individualism, about the nature of reality itself. Among the information in the scrolls was extensive material about Korriban. The ancient Sith homeworld had once been the center of a civilization that predated even the Jedi Order. When the exiled Dark Jedi had arrived there thousands of years ago, they had found a species naturally attuned to darkness, people who practiced what they called Sith magic without truly understanding the Force. The marriage of Dark Jedi knowledge and Sith instinct had created something new and terrible, the Sith Empire, ruled by Dark Lords who wielded powers that defied comprehension. Korriban itself, the scrolls explained, was more than just a world. It was a nexus of dark side power, where centuries of Sith magic and violence had saturated the very ground. The Valley of the Dark Lords contained tombs for the most powerful Sith who had ever lived, Tulak Hord, Marka Ragnos, Ajunta Pal, and dozens of others. These weren't merely burial places, they were fortresses filled with traps, guardians, and dark side challenges designed to test anyone who dared enter. The Sith Lords, even in death, did not welcome visitors. They tested those who sought their knowledge, and those who failed the tests paid with their lives, or worse. As Exar plotted a course for Korriban, Freedon Nad's spirit appeared to him aboard the ship. In the sterile environment of the Starstorm 1, surrounded by modern technology, the ancient Sith Lord's specter seemed even more otherworldly. Nad warned Exar that the trials on Korriban would be dangerous, that many who had ventured into the tombs, seeking power, had never emerged. But he also assured Exar that with proper guidance, with Nad's own wisdom directing him, he would succeed where others had failed. The key, Nad explained, was to surrender fully to the dark side when the moment came, to let go of any remaining attachments to the light and embrace the Sith path completely. The journey to Korriban took Exar through regions of space that were largely abandoned in the modern era. After the Republic's victory over the Sith Empire in the Great Hyperspace War, a millennium earlier, these sectors had been treated as forbidden zones, areas where residual Sith influence made them dangerous for normal colonization. Few ships traveled here, and those that did were usually either desperate, foolish, or deliberately seeking the darkness that permeated the region. Exar found the isolation appropriate. Each parsec he traveled away from the Republic and the Jedi Order felt like shedding old skin, discarding a version of himself that had been weak and constrained. Korriban appeared ahead of him, a world of red rock and ancient evil. From orbit, it looked almost beautiful in a stark way, like a piece of carved ruby suspended in space. But as the Starstorm 1 descended through the atmosphere, the true nature of the world became clear. The air itself felt heavy with dark side presence. The Valley of the Dark Lords stretched across the landscape like an open wound, tomb entrances visible as dark openings in the valley walls. Even from inside his ship, Exar could feel the power concentrated here, could sense the spirits of long-dead Sith Lords stirring as they noticed his arrival. Exar landed his ship near the entrance to the valley and stepped out onto Korriban's surface for the first time. The moment his boots touched the red sand, he felt a connection snap into place, as if the world itself recognized him as belonging here. The force was different on Korriban, flowing in patterns that seemed almost alive, conscious, malevolent. He could hear whispers carried on wind that wasn't moving, voices speaking in languages he didn't understand, but whose meanings penetrated directly into his mind. They spoke of power, of glory, of the right of the strong to rule over the weak. Friedan Nad's spirit materialized beside him, visible even in the harsh daylight of Korriban's sun. The ancient Sith Lord pointed toward a particular tomb, larger than many of the others, with entrance columns carved to resemble massive skeletal hands, reaching from the ground. This, Nad explained, was one of the oldest tombs in the valley, built for a Dark Lord whose name had been lost to history, but whose trials remained among the most challenging. If Exar could survive what waited within, he would emerge transformed, ready to claim true power. Exar entered the tomb with his lightsaber ignited, casting blue light across walls covered in ancient Sith script. The symbols seemed to writhe in the flickering glow, or perhaps they actually were moving, animated by lingering dark side energy. The air inside was stale and cold, thick with the presence of death that had accumulated over millennia. Exar's footsteps echoed in the silence, the only sound except for his own breathing and the steady hum of his lightsaber. The first chamber appeared empty, just bare stone walls and floor. But as Exar moved toward the passage, leading deeper into the tomb, the walls began to shake. Dust rained from the ceiling. Then, with a grinding of stone on stone, the walls themselves began to move inward. The tomb was collapsing, or more accurately, it was being collapsed. This was the test. Could Exar escape before the crushing walls ended him? He ran toward the far passage, but the doorway was closing, a massive stone slab descending to seal it shut. Exar reached out with the force, trying to slow the slab's descent, but it was too heavy, too resistant. His connection to the light side of the force, already weakened by his recent actions and dark side study, felt distant and ineffective. The walls continued closing. The exit was almost sealed. In moments, he would be crushed. Friedan Nad's voice echoed through the collapsing chamber, speaking directly into Exar's mind. This was the moment of choice. Either Exar would cling to his Jedi training, to his belief that he could walk between light and dark, and he would die here as the tomb became his grave. Or he would embrace the dark side completely, without reservation, without the arrogant notion that he could control it, and he would survive. With walls closing just meters apart, and the exit nearly sealed, Exar made his choice. He stopped fighting his anger, his fear, his desperation. He let them flood through him, fuel him, transform him. The dark side rushed in like water through a broken dam, filling spaces in his soul he hadn't known were empty. Power surged through his body, more power than he had ever felt, power that made his previous abilities seem like child's play by comparison. Exar thrust both hands toward the descending slab and poured dark side energy through them. The stone stopped its descent, trembling under the force of conflicting powers. The walls were just a meter apart now, close enough that Exar could touch both sides at once. With a scream of effort and rage, he pushed with everything he had. The slab shattered, exploding into fragments. The walls stopped moving, held in place by Exar's will wrapped in darkness. He stumbled through the broken doorway into the next chamber, gasping for breath, his body shaking from the expenditure of so much power at once. Behind him, the first chamber finished its collapse with a thunderous crash. If he had been seconds slower, he would be dead, crushed and forgotten in an unmarked tomb. But he wasn't dead. He was alive, and he was powerful, more powerful than he had ever imagined possible. Freedon Nad's spirit appeared before him, and for the first time, Exar saw approval in the ancient Sith Lord's eyes. Nad explained that the trial was designed to force a choice. Those who clung to the light, who tried to use Jedi techniques in a place so saturated with darkness, invariably failed. Only by accepting the dark side, by letting it flow through them without reservation, could someone survive. Exar had passed the test, but in doing so, he had completed his transformation. He was no longer a fallen Jedi who dabbled in darkness. He was something new, something terrible. He was a dark Jedi, a servant of the Sith. But Nad wasn't finished with him yet. The spirit led Exar deeper into the tomb, through chambers filled with ancient weapons and armor, past sarcophagi containing the remains of Sith warriors who had served their Dark Lord in life and death. They reached the final chamber where dark side energy concentrated so intensely that the air itself seemed black, as if light couldn't penetrate the oppressive presence. In the center of this chamber sat a pedestal, and on that pedestal rested an amulet. The amulet was a thing of terrible beauty, crafted from black metal and set with a deep red crystal that pulsed with internal light. Nad explained that this was a Sith talisman of immense power, created by sorcerers who had understood how to trap dark side energy in physical objects. Wearing it would connect Exar to the dark side on a fundamental level, would enhance his abilities and grant him access to techniques that even Freedon Nad himself had taken decades to master. But the amulet had a will of its own, born from centuries of containing pure darkness. It would test Exar, try to dominate his mind, to turn him into a puppet controlled by the dark side energies it contained. If Exar's will was strong enough, he would master the amulet. If not, the amulet would master him. Exar approached the pedestal, every instinct warning him of danger. He could feel the amulet's power even from meters away, could sense it reaching out toward him with hunger and anticipation. The red crystal seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat, or perhaps his heartbeat was adjusting to match the crystal's rhythm. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and closed his fingers around the amulet. Pain erupted through his body as the amulet's power surged into him. It felt like every nerve was on fire, like his mind was being invaded by countless screaming voices. The amulet wasn't just granting him power, it was trying to consume him, to hollow him out and make his body a vessel for the dark side energy it contained. Exar fell to his knees, unable to even scream, locked in an internal battle that would determine who he would become. Images flooded his mind. He saw the ancient Sith Empire at its height, thousands of ships blocking out the stars as armadas prepared for war. He saw Sith Lords performing rituals that killed entire populations, sacrificing millions to gain immortality or godlike powers. He saw the moment when the exiled Dark Jedi had first arrived on Korriban, their meeting with the native Sith species, the beginning of a 1,000-year reign of darkness. The amulet was showing him the legacy he was claiming, the traditions he was joining, the path that would either lead to ultimate power or utter destruction. In that moment of crisis, with the amulet trying to dominate his will, Exar made a decision that would define his future. He didn't resist the amulet's power or try to impose his will over it. Instead, he accepted it, welcomed it, made it part of himself, not as a separate entity controlling him, but as an extension of his own being. The distinction might seem subtle, but it determined everything. Exar wasn't being controlled by darkness. He was choosing to become darkness itself. The amulet's assault on his mind ceased as it recognized a compatible host. The pain faded, replaced by a sense of completion, as if Exar had been incomplete his entire life and only now had become whole. When he stood, the amulet hung around his neck, grafted to his skin in a way that suggested it would never come off. He could feel its power flowing through him, enhancing every connection to the Force, amplifying every ability. Most importantly, he could feel walls that had existed in his mind, barriers that had limited what he believed possible, beginning to crumble. Freedom Nad's spirit observed this transformation with satisfaction. Exar Kun had survived trials that killed most who attempted them. He had accepted the dark side completely, without reservation or the delusion that he could somehow remain untouched by it. And he had bonded with a Sith talisman that would make him more powerful than any dark side user in 1,000 years. Nad should have been pleased, should have seen in Exar the perfect apprentice who would help him return to physical form. But as Freedom Nad looked at the transformed Exar Kun, he felt something unexpected: fear. The young man who had entered this tomb was gone. In his place stood someone who radiated power, whose eyes burned with dark side fire, whose very presence seemed to warp the Force around him. This was no longer a student who would docilely follow Nad's instructions. This was a rival, a threat, someone who might well surpass Nad himself. Exar, with his newly enhanced connection to the Force and the amulet's power flowing through him, sensed Nad's fear. More than that, he perceived Nad's true intentions for the first time, intentions that the ancient Sith Lord's spirit had concealed until now. Nad didn't want an apprentice, he wanted a body. His plan had always been to train Exar in Sith alchemy, to teach him the techniques needed to create a new physical vessel, and then to take that vessel for himself. Exar would have been erased, his body stolen, his soul destroyed, all to give Freedom Nad another chance at physical life. Understanding flooded through Exar, and with it came cold rage. He had been used, manipulated, led like a fool toward his own destruction. But Nad had miscalculated. By pushing Exar to embrace the dark side so completely, by encouraging him to bond with the Sith amulet, Nad had made Exar too powerful to be easily dominated or destroyed. The intended victim had become the predator. Exar extended his hand, and dark side power erupted from his palm in a torrent of pure hatred. Freedom Nad's spirit tried to flee, to fade into the ether and escape to fight another day. But the amulet Exar now wore had been designed for exactly this purpose, to control and destroy Force spirits. The ancient Sith who had crafted it had wanted protection from the ghosts of rivals who might seek revenge from beyond death. Now that protection served Exar as he trapped Nad's spirit, preventing its escape. Nad's form writhed as Exar poured more power into the attack. The ancient Sith Lord had endured for 3 centuries, influencing events across generations, corrupting rulers and Jedi alike. But he had never faced anyone with Exar's raw power, enhanced by a talisman specifically designed to combat spirits. Freedom Nad screamed, a sound that echoed not just in the physical tomb but across the currents of the Force itself. And then, with a final burst of light that seemed blinding in the darkness, Nad's spirit was destroyed, utterly and completely, banished into the chaos that awaited Force users who had given themselves entirely to darkness. The tomb fell silent. Exar stood alone, breathing heavily, his body still thrumming with dark side power. He had entered Korriban as a fallen Jedi seeking knowledge. He emerged from that tomb as something unprecedented, a dark Jedi with the power of ancient Sith Lords, unbound by any master, free to pursue his own vision of what he might become. More importantly, he had learned a crucial lesson. Those who claimed to be teachers often had their own agendas, their own plans that might not align with their students' interests. From this point forward, Exar would trust no one, rely on no one, bow to no one. He would take what he wanted, learn what he needed, and let no person or philosophy constrain him. As Exar walked out of the tomb and back into Korriban's harsh sunlight, he knew his journey was far from over. The scrolls he had taken from Nad's tomb on Dia Shun had mentioned another location, another source of power. Yavin 4, a jungle moon where the Sith Lord Nagasado had fled after his defeat in the Great Hyperspace War. Sado had built temples there, conducted experiments, left behind knowledge and artifacts that might still remain. More than that, the scrolls suggested that Sado had enslaved a primitive species called the Massassi, transforming them through Sith alchemy into weapons of war. If those Massassi descendants still lived on Yavin 4, they might serve Exar as they once served Sado. Exar returned to his ship and plotted a new course. Behind him, Korriban's tombs fell silent once more, their tests completed, their purpose served. One more seeker of power had come to the ancient Sith homeworld. But unlike those who came before him, Exar Kun had not only survived, he had conquered. The Valley of the Dark Lords had tested him and found him worthy. Freedon Nad had tried to use him and been destroyed for the attempt. Now, as the Starstorm 1 lifted off from Korriban's surface, Exar Kun set his sights on the next step in his transformation. He had claimed the legacy of the Sith. Soon, he would forge an empire worthy of that legacy, and the galaxy would learn to fear a name that history would remember for thousands of years to come. The journey from Korriban to Yavin 4 gave Exar Kun time to process everything that had happened. He was no longer the arrogant Jedi Padawan who had left Dantooine seeking forbidden knowledge. He was no longer even the fallen Jedi who had entered Freedon Nad's tomb on Dia Shun. The trials on Korriban, the bonding with the Sith amulet, the destruction of Nad's spirit, all of it had transformed him into something new. He could feel the dark side flowing through him with every breath, enhancing his perceptions, amplifying his abilities, whispering possibilities that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. The Sith amulet hung around his neck, its presence constant and reassuring. Through it, Exar could sense echoes of the ancient Sith Empire, fragments of knowledge encoded in the talisman itself. The dark side users who had crafted this artifact had poured their understanding into it, and now that understanding flowed into Exar. He learned techniques without formal instruction, discovered abilities through intuition enhanced by the amulet's power. It was intoxicating, this sense of unlimited potential, of barriers falling away to reveal horizons he had never imagined. As the Starstorm 1 approached the Yavin system, Exar felt a pull through the Force unlike anything he had experienced before. The fourth moon of the gas giant Yavin radiated dark side energy in waves that reached across space. This wasn't the cold, tomb-like presence of Korriban. Yavin 4's darkness felt alive, growing, fed by centuries of Sith magic and the jungle itself. Where Korriban was death, Yavin 4 was corruption. Life twisted into shapes that served darkness rather than light. The moon was a vision of primal beauty from orbit. Endless jungle covered most of the surface, broken only by rivers and the occasional stone structure jutting above the canopy. These structures, Exar realized, were the temples mentioned in Freedon Nad's scrolls. Massive pyramids built by the ancient Sith Lord Nagasado and the Massassi warriors he had enslaved. From space, they looked small, insignificant against the vast jungle. But as Exar descended through the atmosphere, their true scale became apparent. These were monuments designed to channel dark side energy, to concentrate and amplify it, turning the entire moon into a nexus of power. Exar landed the Starstorm 1 near one of the largest temples, a stepped pyramid that rose above the jungle canopy like a stone mountain. The moment he opened the ship's hatch, the heat and humidity of Yavin 4 struck him like a physical blow. The air was thick, almost liquid, filled with the sounds of creatures and the smell of decomposition and growth happening simultaneously. Everything here was alive in a way that civilized worlds had forgotten. The jungle didn't just exist, it fought for every centimeter of space, every shaft of sunlight, every drop of water. As Exar stepped onto the moss-covered stone at the temple's base, he heard a sound that made him instantly alert. It was rhythmic, almost musical, but with an underlying threat that set his nerves on edge. Then they emerged from the jungle, the Masasi. Dozens of them surrounding him, their primitive weapons raised, but their movements hesitant. They looked almost human, but centuries of Sith alchemy had changed them. Their skin had a reddish tint, their features were more angular, and their eyes held an intelligence that warred with the beast-like modifications Sado had inflicted on their ancestors. The Masasi carried weapons that Exar had never seen before. Lanvaroks, circular throwing weapons that could be hurled with deadly accuracy. They also wielded war clubs embedded with stone and bone, and primitive axes that looked capable of splitting a person in half. These were warriors, bred and modified for battle, and they recognized Exar as an intruder in their domain. Their leader, larger than the rest and bearing scars that spoke of countless conflicts, stepped forward and made a sound that was part challenge, part question. Exar tried to access the Force, to use it to communicate or defend himself, but something was wrong. The light side, already distant after his transformations on Korriban, felt completely blocked here. The dark side presence of Yavin 4 was so overwhelming that it interfered with his connection to anything else. Panic flickered through him as the Masasi closed in. He had survived Korriban's trials only to be killed by primitives on this jungle moon. The Masasi attacked. Lanvaroks flew through the air, spinning discs of death that Exar barely dodged. He ignited his blue lightsaber, the blade humming to life and casting its glow across the gathered warriors. Some of the Masasi hesitated at this display, but their leader roared, and they surged forward. Exar found himself fighting for his life against opponents whose strength and speed had been enhanced by Sith alchemy, whose numbers seemed endless as more emerged from the jungle. A Lanvarok struck his shoulder, cutting deep and sending pain lancing through his body. Another caught his leg. Exar stumbled, falling to one knee as blood ran from his wounds. The Masasi pressed their advantage, weapons raised to finish him. In that moment, with death imminent, Exar had no choice left. He stopped trying to reach the light side. He stopped holding back the dark side energy that the amulet and his transformations had given him. He let it erupt. The Sith amulet blazed with power, its red crystal becoming so bright it illuminated the entire area. Dark side energy poured from Exar in waves, not directed or controlled, but simply released in a torrent of pure power. The Masasi nearest to him were thrown backward, as if struck by an invisible wall. Those farther away fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the presence they felt. The jungle itself seemed to react, plants withering, birds falling silent, as darkness radiated outward with Exar at its center. Through the amulet's power, Exar reached into the minds of the Masasi. He found memories there, genetic memories passed down through generations. They remembered Nagasado, the Dark Lord who had transformed their ancestors. They remembered serving him, building his temples, channeling the Force at his command. Deep in their altered DNA, in the very changes Sith alchemy had made to their species, was a compulsion to serve Sith Lords. Exar triggered that compulsion, not with subtle manipulation, but with overwhelming force. He declared himself their new master, their god, the inheritor of Nagasado's legacy. The effect was immediate and total. The Masasi, who had been trying to kill him moments before, now prostrated themselves, pressing their faces to the ground in submission. Their leader approached on his knees, offering his war club to Exar in a gesture of absolute loyalty. Through the Force, Exar could feel their devotion, could sense that they would follow any command he gave, would die at his word without hesitation. The Massassi had found a new Dark Lord to serve. As Exar's wounds began to heal, accelerated by dark side techniques, the amulet helped him access. He surveyed his new domain. The Massassi numbered in the thousands across Yavin 4. They had maintained Nagasado's temples for centuries, keeping the structures intact, even though they no longer understood their purpose. They had preserved Sith artifacts, protected chambers filled with ancient knowledge, all in preparation for the day when a new master would arrive to command them. That day had come. Over the following weeks, Exar explored Yavin 4 with Massassi guides, leading him to every temple, every hidden chamber, every location where Nagasado had left traces of his knowledge. What he discovered both amazed and disturbed him. Sado had been one of the most powerful Sith Lords in history, a master of Sith alchemy and ancient rituals. The temples weren't just buildings, they were machines, designed to draw dark side energy from the moon itself and concentrate it for whoever controlled them. The largest temple, the one where Exar had landed, was the focal point of a network that turned the entire moon into a dark side nexus. In the depths of that central temple, Exar found Nagasado's meditation chamber. The ancient Dark Lord's body was long gone, turned to dust centuries ago. But Sado had left something more valuable than physical remains. He had left knowledge, holocrons, scrolls, artifacts, all carefully preserved and protected by Sith alchemy that had kept them intact through the ages. Exar spent days in that chamber, absorbing everything Sado had left behind, learning techniques that made what he had learned from Freedom Nad seem like child's play. Among the most significant discoveries were Sado's notes on Sith alchemy. The ancient Dark Lord had been obsessed with using the Force to transform living beings, to reshape life itself according to his will. The Massassi were his greatest success, a warrior species modified to be absolutely loyal, incredibly strong, and naturally attuned to dark side rituals. But Sado's notes described other experiments, other possibilities. With enough power and knowledge, a Sith Lord could create monsters, could transform enemies into servants, could even cheat death itself by transferring consciousness into new bodies. Exar also found records of a Sith weapon that Sado had used during his war with the Republic, a super weapon capable of causing stars to go supernova. The Dark Reaper, as it was called, drew power from the Force itself, harvesting energy from living beings and focusing it into destructive beams. Sado had used it to cover his retreat after his invasion of the Republic failed, causing a star to explode and wiping out pursuing fleets. The weapon itself was hidden somewhere on Yavin 4, waiting to be reclaimed. But perhaps the most valuable thing Exar found in Sado's chambers was a vision. As he meditated in the seat where Sado had once sat, surrounded by artifacts charged with dark side power, Exar fell into a trance. In that trance, he saw himself as a Dark Lord of the Sith, commanding armies, conquering worlds, building an empire that would eclipse even the ancient Sith Empire of legend. He saw Jedi falling before him, their order shattered by his power. He saw the Republic burning, replaced by a new galactic order, built on Sith principles. The vision showed him that he was destined for greatness, that everything that had happened, his expulsion from the Jedi, his journey to darkness, his trials on Korriban, his arrival on Yavin 4, all of it had been leading to this moment. He was meant to restore the Sith to their former glory, to prove that the dark side was not weakness or corruption, but the true path to power. All he needed was followers worthy of his vision, allies who could help him achieve what no single Sith Lord could accomplish alone. As Exar emerged from his meditation, he knew what had to be done. The temples needed to be activated, their power networks brought online for the first time in centuries. The Masaci needed to be organized into a proper army, trained and equipped for the wars to come. And most importantly, Exar needed to find other Force users, other individuals, who could be turned to the dark side and shaped into instruments of his will. Under Exar's direction, the Masaci began the work of fully restoring the temples. They cleared centuries of jungle growth, repaired damaged stone, and reactivated the ancient mechanisms that allowed the structures to channel dark side energy. The process took months, but Exar had time. He was building something that would last, something that would change the galaxy forever. And as the temples came back to life, as dark side power began flowing through them once more, Exar felt his own abilities growing. The temples amplified his connection to the Force, gave him access to reserves of power that seemed bottomless. During this time, Exar also experimented with the Sith alchemy techniques he had learned from Sado's records. He created monsters, creatures twisted from Yavin 4's native fauna into something far more dangerous. He modified some of the Masaci, enhancing their strength and loyalty even further, creating an elite guard that would serve as his personal army. The ethics of these actions never troubled him. He had moved beyond Jedi notions of right and wrong. There was only power and the wisdom to use it effectively. But isolation on Yavin 4, however productive, was not enough. Exar knew that to truly achieve his vision, he needed to return to the wider galaxy. He needed to find the conflicts and power struggles that would give him opportunities to expand his influence. And he knew, thanks to what he had learned from Nagasado's records, exactly where to look. The Empress Teta system was in turmoil. A Sith cult called the Krath had risen there, led by nobles who had discovered some fragment of dark side knowledge. They weren't true Sith. They were amateurs, playing with powers they didn't understand. But their chaos could be useful, and perhaps among them, Exar would find individuals worth corrupting and recruiting. Before leaving Yavin 4, Exar conducted one final ritual. In the central temple, surrounded by his Masaci followers, he used Sith alchemy to modify his lightsaber. The blue blade that had marked him as a Jedi no longer felt appropriate. More than that, Exar had discovered designs in Sado's archives for a weapon that no one in the modern galaxy had seen in millennia, a double-bladed lightsaber. By attaching a second blade assembly to his existing hilt and extending the handle, Exar created something unprecedented. When activated, blue-white blades extended from both ends of the weapon, giving him twice the offensive capability and opening up entirely new fighting styles. With his new weapon, his Masaci army, his enhanced powers, and the temples of Yavin 4 serving as his base, Exar Kun departed the Jungle Moon. He set course for the Empress Teta system, ready to begin the next phase of his plan. He didn't know that his arrival there would trigger events that would plunge the galaxy into one of its darkest periods. He didn't know that he was about to meet another fallen Jedi whose power nearly matched his own. And he certainly didn't know that the ancient Sith Lord, Marka Ranos, dead for 1,000 years, was watching events unfold and preparing to anoint new Dark Lords for a new age. The Empress Teta system was burning. As Exar's ship emerged from hyperspace, he could see signs of conflict throughout the system. Orbital stations showed battle damage. Wreckage from destroyed vessels drifted in space. And on the surface of the 7 inhabited worlds, particularly the capital world of Empress Teta proper, fires burned in cities where combat had recently taken place. The Krath had taken control of the system through a brutal coup, killing the system's rightful leaders and imposing their rule through fear and Sith-inspired magic. Exar descended toward the capital city of Sinagar, the seat of Krath power. The city was a strange mix of ancient beauty and recent destruction. Elegant towers and palaces stood alongside buildings damaged by warfare. The streets showed signs of fighting, blast marks, destroyed vehicles, areas where bodies had recently been cleared. The Krath ruled through intimidation, and Sinagar bore the scars of that approach. The Krath leadership consisted of two nobles, Alima Cato and her cousin Satal Cato. They had discovered some of Frida Nad's teachings during their travels, and had used that knowledge to stage their coup. They commanded war droids, Krath warriors trained in primitive dark side techniques, and a fleet of warships that had defeated Republic forces sent to restore order. They were dangerous, capable, and absolutely not prepared for someone like Exar Kun. Exar's ship was challenged as it approached Sinagar, Krath fighters demanding identification and purpose. Through the Force, Exar reached out and touched the minds of the pilots. They suddenly forgot they had seen his ship, forgot to report it, and returned to their patrols with gaps in their memory they didn't even notice. Exar landed in a secured area of the city and made his way toward the Iron Citadel, the fortress where the Krath leadership resided. But Exar wasn't the only Force user making his way through Sinagar's streets that day. Another had come to the Empress Teta system with a very different purpose. Ulic Qel-Droma had once been one of the Jedi Order's most promising knights. Trained by Master Arkajeth alongside his brother Kay, Ulic had everything a Jedi could want: skill, dedication, and a deep connection to the Force. But when the Krath had attacked a Jedi gathering on Deneba, when they had killed Master Arca in front of Ulic's eyes, something inside the young Jedi had broken. Ulic had proposed a plan to infiltrate the Krath, to destroy them from within by pretending to join their ranks. The Jedi Council had refused permission, recognizing the danger, but Ulic, consumed by grief and rage, had gone anyway. He had allowed himself to be captured, had endured Krath torture to maintain his cover, and had gradually worked his way into the Krath's inner circle. Along the way, something had happened that Ulic hadn't anticipated. The darkness he was pretending to embrace had begun to embrace him back. By the time Exar arrived in Sinagar, Ulic had become one of the Krath's leaders. He commanded their armies, shared power with Alima Cato, and wielded dark side techniques with growing proficiency. Whether he was still playing a role or had genuinely fallen to the dark side was a question even Ulic himself might not have been able to answer. The line between pretending and becoming had blurred beyond recognition. Exar sensed Ulic's presence through the Force, another powerful dark side user, someone whose strength was genuine and whose fall was complete enough that the light side had become distant. This was interesting. Exar had expected to find the Krath's leadership, corrupt them or destroy them as needed. He hadn't expected to find another fallen Jedi, someone who might actually be worthy of serving as more than a simple follower. The two Force users met in the Iron Citadel's main hall. Alima and Satal Cato were present, along with Krath warriors who tensed at the sight of an armed intruder. But Exar's attention fixed entirely on Ulic Qel-Droma. The two men regarded each other in silence, each taking the other's measure. Through the Force, they touched minds, and in that instant of contact, both felt something unexpected. They were equals, different in temperament and journey, but equal in power. The meeting quickly escalated into confrontation. Exar declared that the Krath were pretenders, amateurs playing with Sith knowledge they didn't understand. The true legacy of the Sith belonged to him alone, and these nobles with their war droids were unworthy of the power they wielded. Ulic, his pride stung by this assessment and his position challenged, responded that Exar knew nothing of what the Krath had accomplished, of the victories they had won against both Republic and Jedi forces. Words gave way to action. Both men ignited their lightsabers. Ulic's was standard, a single blade of yellow-green that had once marked him as a Jedi. Exar activated his new double-bladed weapon, and the room filled with gasps as blue-white light extended from both ends of his hilt. No one present had ever seen such a weapon. Even Ulic paused, momentarily uncertain how to fight something so unusual. The duel that followed shook the Iron Citadel. Exar's double-bladed lightsaber gave him offensive capabilities that Ulick struggled to counter. The weapon spun and whirled, one blade blocking while the other attacked, creating patterns of defense and offense that were nearly impossible to penetrate. But Ulick was no ordinary opponent. His training under Arkajeth had been comprehensive, and his recent battles with the Krath had honed his skills even further. He adapted quickly, finding gaps in Exar's technique, pressing attacks that forced the double blade's advantages to become disadvantages. They fought through the Citadel's halls, their lightsabers carving molten lines in walls and floors. Krath warriors attempted to intervene, but were thrown aside by force waves from both combatants. Alima watched with growing alarm, realizing that either of these beings could kill her without effort. The duel had no clear victor emerging. For every advantage Exar gained with his unusual weapon, and his deep connection to Sith knowledge, Ulick countered with raw power and a warrior's instinct honed by recent conflicts. Then, something extraordinary happened. The Sith amulets that both men wore, Exar's from Korriban, Ulick's given to him by the Krath after he had proven himself, began to glow. The red crystals pulsed with light that grew brighter with each passing second. The amulets were reacting to something, responding to a presence that neither combatant had summoned, but both could suddenly feel pressing down on reality itself. The air in the Iron Citadel grew cold. Shadows deepened despite the bright afternoon sun streaming through windows. And then, materializing as if stepping through a veil between the living world and whatever came after, the spirits of ancient Sith Lords appeared. They were translucent, ghostly, but their presence was overwhelming. Exar and Ulick both felt their knees weaken, forced down by sheer weight of the power these spirits represented. At the center of the spectral gathering stood Marka Ragnos, Dark Lord of the Sith, who had ruled the ancient Sith Empire during its golden age over 1,000 years ago. His reign had lasted more than a century, an almost unheard-of duration for a Sith Lord, and his death had triggered the power vacuum that eventually led to the Empire's destruction. Now, his spirit had manifested, drawn by the conflict between two powerful dark side users, drawn by the potential he sensed in both. Marka Ragnos' voice echoed through the hall, speaking with authority that transcended death itself. He commanded Exar and Ulick to cease their conflict. Their duel, he explained, served no purpose except to weaken them both and destroy potential that the dark side needed. The Sith had been dormant too long. The galaxy had forgotten the terror that the true Sith Empire once inspired. These two fallen Jedi represented an opportunity, a chance to restore the Sith to power, to reclaim what had been lost when the Republic shattered the old Empire. But first, Ragnos continued, they needed to accept their roles. One must lead, and one must follow. One must be master, and one must be apprentice. This was the way of the Sith, the structure that prevented the self-destructive infighting that had contributed to the old Empire's fall. Ragnos examined both combatants through eyes that saw not just physical form, but the essence of their souls, the depth of their power, the nature of their connection to darkness. Marka Ragnos raised one spectral hand and pointed at Exar Kun. Exar felt something change within him, a transformation that was both subtle and profound. The ancient Dark Lord proclaimed Exar as the Dark Lord of the Sith, the inheritor of the legacy, the one who would lead the Sith back to glory. Ragnos then turned to Ulick Qel-Droma and designated him as Exar's apprentice, his right hand, the warrior who would command the armies while Exar shaped the larger strategy. The titles were given, the hierarchy established, and with those pronouncements, something fundamental shifted in the galaxy's destiny. The spirits of the ancient Sith Lords faded, returning to whatever realm they inhabited. The cold dissipated. The shadows retreated to normal proportions, but nothing would be the same. Exar and Ulick stood facing each other, no longer as rivals but as Dark Lord and apprentice. The connection between them, forged in combat, and sanctified by Marka Ragnos, ran deep through the Force. They could sense each other's thoughts, feel each other's emotions, draw on each other's strength. They were bound together now, for better or worse, in a partnership that would reshape galactic history. Alima and Sato Kido approached cautiously, understanding that the power dynamic in Sinagar had fundamentally changed. They were no longer the leaders of the Krath. They were now subordinates to these Sith Lords. Exar made this clear immediately. The Krath would continue to exist, but they would serve the larger purpose of restoring the Sith. Their armies, their resources, their territory, all of it now belonged to the Brotherhood of the Sith, the new order that Exar and Ulic would build together. Over the following weeks, Exar and Ulic consolidated their power and laid plans for campaigns that would bring the Republic to its knees. Ulic would command the military operations, leading Krath and Mandalorian warriors in strikes against Republic installations. Exar would focus on corrupting the Jedi Order itself, turning Jedi to the dark side and creating an army of dark Jedi who would shatter their former comrades from within. Together, they would wage total war on both the Republic and the Jedi Order. But first, Exar had a specific mission in mind. The great Jedi library on Ossus contained knowledge that even the Sith Empire, at its height, had not possessed. Ancient texts, holocrons, artifacts from the earliest days of the Jedi Order, all of it carefully preserved and protected. More importantly, Ossus was where many young Jedi trained, where Padawans learned from masters in preparation for their trials. If Exar could reach those Padawans before their training was complete, if he could show them the power the dark side offered, he might turn dozens or even hundreds of Jedi to his cause in a single stroke. Exar traveled to Ossus in secret, his ship landing far from the Great Library's location. He made his way through the forests and valleys of the Jedi world, sensing Force sensitives in every direction. Ossus practically hummed with light side energy, thousands of Jedi creating a resonance that would normally repel dark side users. But Exar had learned techniques on Yavin 4 that allowed him to mask his presence, to appear to Force senses as nothing more than a shadow, easily overlooked and quickly forgotten. He found what he was looking for in a training ground, where Master Udnar, an ancient Neti Jedi, was instructing a group of eager Padawans. Exar watched from concealment as the Master taught lightsaber forms, as he explained the philosophy of the Jedi, as he warned against the seductions of the dark side. And Exar saw in those Padawans' eyes something the Master apparently didn't: doubt, frustration, impatience. These young Jedi wanted to be more than they were. They wanted power that their slow, careful training seemed designed to delay as long as possible. Exar waited until the training session ended and the Padawans dispersed. Then he revealed himself to them, not as a threat, but as a teacher. He spoke to them of the Jedi Council's hypocrisy, how they hoarded knowledge while claiming to serve the galaxy. He demonstrated abilities that none of their masters had shown them, techniques for dominating minds, for projecting fear, for channeling emotion into raw power. He told them that the dark side wasn't evil, that it was simply another tool, another way of accessing the Force, that the Jedi prohibited, out of fear that students might surpass their teachers. His words found fertile ground. Within days, 20 Jedi had abandoned their training and joined Exar. They left Ossus in secret, making their way to Yavin 4, where Exar promised to teach them everything the Jedi had hidden. These weren't weak-willed individuals or failures as Jedi. They were some of the Order's most talented students, including Os Willem, Crado, and others who would have become powerful Jedi Knights if they had completed their training. Now they would become something else entirely. On Yavin 4, in the temples he had prepared for exactly this purpose, Exar began their transformation. He had them study the Sith holocrons he had recovered. He taught them techniques from Nagasado's archives. He had them meditate in chambers designed to break down their light side conditioning and replace it with dark side understanding. The process was brutal, pushing each student to the breaking point and beyond. Some failed, their minds shattered by exposure to dark side energy their training hadn't prepared them to resist. But most succeeded, emerging as Dark Jedi, as the first members of the Brotherhood of the Sith. With his Brotherhood forming and Ulic's armies preparing for war, Exar set in motion the next phase of his plan. He instructed his Dark Jedi to return to their former masters, but not as students. They would approach their masters and, at a predetermined moment across the galaxy, they would strike. In one coordinated assault, they would kill the Jedi leadership, decapitating the Order and throwing it into chaos. It was bold, ruthless, and if successful, it would remove the greatest obstacle to Sith domination of the galaxy. The day of the strikes arrived. Across dozens of worlds, Dark Jedi confronted their former masters. Some successes exceeded expectations. Masters who had trained their students well found themselves victims of that very training. But other attempts failed. Masters sensed their students' dark side taint and struck first, or defended themselves successfully, or simply proved too powerful for their corrupted Padawans to defeat. The Purge achieved some of its objectives, but fell short of the total victory Exar had envisioned. Meanwhile, Ulic had been conducting his own campaign. He had challenged Mandalore the Indomitable to single combat, defeating the legendary warrior and claiming leadership of the Mandalorian Crusaders. With Mandalorians, Krath, and his growing Dark Jedi forces, Ulic struck at Republic shipyards and military installations, crippling the Republic's ability to respond to the crisis. The Great Sith War, as historians would later call it, had begun in earnest. But Exar knew that symbolic victories mattered as much as military ones. He needed to demonstrate that the Sith were not just attacking from the shadows, but could strike at the very heart of Republic power. When Ulic was captured after a failed attack on Coruscant, brought before the Senate in chains to stand trial for his crimes, Exar saw his opportunity. Exar burst into the Senate hall during Ulic's trial, accompanied by Mandalore and a cadre of Massassi warriors. Using Sith sorcery, he froze the entire Senate in place. Thousands of beings held immobile by the power of his will. Only the Jedi present and the Supreme Chancellor remained free to move. Exar murdered the Chancellor in front of the frozen Senate, a demonstration that no position, no office, no amount of security could protect those who opposed the Sith. Then he freed Ulic from his bonds. As Exar and his forces prepared to leave, one figure blocked their path. Vodosiusk Bas, Exar's former master, had been in the Senate representing the Jedi Order's interests. The old Krivaki stepped forward, his wooden staff in his tentacles, and pleaded with his former student one final time. Bas spoke of the love he still held for Exar, of the pain it caused to see what Exar had become, of the certainty that this path could only end in destruction and suffering. Exar listened to his former master's words, and for just a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Regret, recognition of the truth in what Bas said. But then the moment passed. Exar ignited his double-bladed lightsaber and challenged Bas to combat. If the master could defeat him in a duel, Exar said, he would submit to judgment and return to the light. But if Exar won, Bas must accept that his student had surpassed him, that the dark side offered power the Jedi could never match. The duel was brief and brutal. Vodosiusk Bas wielded his quarterstaff with all the skill that had made him a legendary master. For a time, he held his own against Exar's assault, his force-imbued staff blocking the double-bladed lightsaber's strikes. But Bas was old, and Exar was at the height of his dark side-enhanced power. When Exar revealed the full capabilities of his weapon, when both blades spun and struck from unexpected angles, Bas's defense finally broke. The double-bladed lightsaber pierced through the quarterstaff and then through Bas's body, As his former master fell dying, Bas spoke final words that Exar would never forget. The old Jedi promised that they would meet again, that Exar would eventually be defeated, and that when that day came, Bas would be there to see justice done. Then, Vodosyosk Bas became one with the Force, his body fading, leaving only his damaged quarterstaff as evidence he had ever existed. Exar and Ulic departed Coruscant, with the galaxy in shock. They had murdered the Supreme Chancellor in the heart of Republic power. They had demonstrated that even the Senate itself was vulnerable to Sith assault, and they had killed a legendary Jedi Master, proving that the Order could be defeated. The Great Sith War entered a new and darker phase, with the Brotherhood of the Sith ascendant and the Republic struggling to mount an effective defense. But Exar knew that military victories alone wouldn't achieve his goals. He needed knowledge, needed the resources to build the Sith Empire he envisioned. And that meant one final assault on the greatest repository of Jedi knowledge in the galaxy. It meant attacking Ossus itself, the library world where secrets stretching back tens of thousands of years were carefully preserved. Exar would take that knowledge, claim those secrets, and with them build a Sith Order that would endure for eternity. The plans for the assault on Ossus required careful coordination. Alima Keto, ambitious and eager to prove herself valuable to the Sith Lords, proposed using one of Nagasato's ancient weapons. She had discovered references to the technique in Krath archives, a way to cause stars to go supernova by using the Force and Sith artifacts to destabilize their cores. If they could trigger a supernova in the Kron cluster, a collection of 10 stars near Ossus, the resulting explosion would give them the cover they needed to raid the Great Library, while the Jedi were evacuating. Exar recognized the plan's potential, but also saw an opportunity to rid himself of a potential problem. Alima had become increasingly difficult to control, her ambitions growing with each victory. She wanted more power, more recognition, and she had started questioning Exar's decisions. The supernova mission would be dangerous, requiring someone to stay close to the exploding stars to maintain the necessary Force rituals. Exar told Alima she was the only one skilled enough to perform this crucial task. It was a lie, but one wrapped in enough flattery that Alima accepted it proudly. As Alima took Krath ships to the Kron cluster and began the ritual that would cause the stars to explode, Exar and Ulic led the assault on Ossus. They arrived during the evacuation, with Jedi scrambling to save as many precious texts and artifacts as possible before the supernova's radiation reached the planet. The confusion gave Exar's forces the opening they needed. Dark Jedi and Massassi warriors swept through the Great Library, seizing holocrons, scrolls, and ancient weapons that the Jedi had protected for millennia. Exar himself went deeper into the library, seeking the office of Odan-Ur, the Keeper of Antiquities. The ancient Drathos Master had served the Jedi Order for nearly 1,000 years, and his knowledge of their history was unmatched. Exar found him trying to save a particular holocron, one that contained information about the earliest days of the Jedi Order. Odan-Ur, despite his great age and wisdom, was not a warrior. He tried to reason with Exar, tried to appeal to whatever good might remain in the fallen Jedi. Exar responded by killing him, not in combat, not even in anger, but simply as one might remove an obstacle. He took the holocron from Odan-Ur's dying hands and claimed several others from the Master's collection. These holocrons contained knowledge that most Jedi never accessed, information about the Force that the Council deemed too dangerous or too corrupting for general study. Now that knowledge belonged to the Sith. As the supernova's radiation approached Ossus, as the sky itself began to burn, Exar and his forces departed with their stolen treasures. Behind them, they left the Great Library in ruins, Odan-Ur dead, and the surviving Jedi fleeing a world that would soon be scorched, nearly lifeless. In the Kron cluster, Alima Keto realized too late that she had been betrayed. The supernova consumed her ship and her life, exactly as Exar had intended. The raid on Ossus seemed like a triumph, but it marked the beginning of the end for Exar Kun's brotherhood. Ulic had been in the thick of the fighting, had confronted his own brother Kay during the evacuation. In a moment of rage and dark side fury, Ulic killed Kay, struck him down with his lightsaber. But immediately after, Nomi Sunrider, a powerful Jedi who had loved Ulic before his fall, used an ancient technique to sever Ulic's connection to the Force. The effect was devastating and immediate. Everything that Ulic had been, everything that had given his life meaning, disappeared in an instant. He could no longer feel the Force, could no longer sense Exar through their bond, could no longer access the powers that had made him a Sith Lord. Stripped of everything, broken by the realization of what he had become and what he had done, Ulic turned on Exar. He revealed to the pursuing Jedi the location of Yavin 4, gave them everything they needed to launch a final assault on the Sith stronghold. Exar returned to Yavin 4 alone, his apprentice gone, his forces scattered, the Republic and Jedi Order rallying for a final assault. In the temples he had restored, surrounded by his Massassi followers, Exar Kun prepared for the end. But he had no intention of simply dying. In Nagasato's archives, he had found references to techniques that could preserve one's spirit after death, that could allow a Sith Lord to endure beyond physical destruction. If he couldn't rule the galaxy in body, he would find another way to continue his existence. The Republic fleet arrived in orbit around Yavin 4, more ships than had ever been assembled for a single operation. The Jedi came as well, hundreds of them, united in their determination to end the Sith threat forever. They established a cordon around the moon, preventing any escape. Then they began what would be the strangest battle in Jedi history. Not a physical assault, but a Force assault. A direct attack through the currents of power that bound the galaxy together. In the central temple on Yavin 4, Exar Kun felt the attack beginning. It started as pressure, like the atmosphere itself was becoming heavier. Then he felt it. Hundreds of Jedi working in unison, their combined wills focused on a single purpose: to destroy him and the dark side, corruption, he had brought to Yavin 4. The light side pressed down on the moon like a massive hand, seeking to crush everything dark beneath its weight. Exar had one chance. The ritual he had discovered in Sadau's archives required a sacrifice of tremendous magnitude. It needed death on a scale that would provide enough power to break the bonds of flesh and preserve spirit. The Massassi, loyal to the last, stood ready to serve their Dark Lord one final time. With tears of genuine regret, because, despite everything, Exar had come to respect his faithful warriors, he enacted the ritual. Dark side power erupted from Exar's body in waves. It reached out to every Massassi on Yavin 4, thousands of them, and in an instant, it drained their life force completely. They fell where they stood, every one of them dying simultaneously to fuel their master's immortality. The power Exar gained from this sacrifice was immense, enough to perform the ritual that would separate his spirit from his dying body. As the Jedi's light side assault intensified, as they poured more and more power into destroying the darkness on Yavin 4, Exar completed his ritual. His physical body died, destroyed by the combined assault, but his spirit remained, anchored to the temples he had restored, bound to Yavin 4 by the very rituals he had performed and the sacrifices he had made. The Jedi sensed his physical death and believed they had won. They withdrew, leaving Yavin 4 a scarred and lifeless moon, satisfied that the greatest Sith threat in a millennium had been eliminated. But Exar Kun endured. His spirit remained trapped in the temples, unable to leave the moon, but also unable to be destroyed. He could only wait, conscious but helpless, as centuries passed, and the galaxy forgot the terror he had once inspired. The Great Sith War ended with his apparent death. The Jedi Order recovered, rebuilt, and continued their mission. The Republic endured. But deep in the jungle temples of Yavin 4, something ancient and angry waited for another chance, waited for the day when new victims might wander into his domain and give him the opportunity to complete what he had started so long ago. 4,000 years is a span of time difficult for mortal minds to truly comprehend. Civilizations rise and fall. Species evolve or go extinct. Technologies are discovered, forgotten, and rediscovered. Stars are born and die. In 4,000 years, the galaxy that Exar Kun had known, the Republic he had sought to conquer, the Jedi Order he had tried to corrupt, all of it changed beyond recognition. But Exar Kun did not experience those 4 millennia as mortals do. His spirit, trapped in the temples of Yavin 4, existed in a state between consciousness and oblivion. He was aware, but not truly awake. He could sense presences when they came near his domain, could feel the passage of time as a distant concept, rather than a lived experience. The jungle reclaimed much of what the Masasi had built. Vines covered the temples. Trees grew from cracks in ancient stone. The once great complex that had channeled dark side power across the entire moon became ruins, slowly dissolving back into the wilderness. Occasionally, over those long centuries, visitors came to Yavin 4. Explorers, treasure hunters, scholars seeking artifacts from the ancient Sith era. Most never made it past the moon's dangerous wildlife. Those few who did reach the temples rarely penetrated deep enough to trigger Exar's awareness, and on the few occasions when someone did wake his dormant spirit, when he reached out to influence or corrupt them, they either fled in terror or died in the attempt to plunder his domain. Exar lacked the power to do more than touch minds, to whisper suggestions, to plant seeds of darkness that might or might not take root. He was a shadow of what he had been, trapped and helpless. The galaxy forgot him. The Great Sith War became history, then became legend, then became myth. Details were lost, distorted by retelling, simplified for easy comprehension. Most records that mentioned Exar Kun described him as a fallen Jedi, who had briefly threatened the Republic before being defeated by the Jedi Order. The full scope of his power, the depth of his corruption, the innovations he had brought to Sith, philosophy and practice, all of it faded from general knowledge. Even among the Jedi, whose carefully maintained archives preserved more accurate information, Exar Kun was just another name in a long list of dark side users who had failed to overcome the light. But the dark side itself did not forget. The temples on Yavin 4 remained saturated with dark side energy, creating a nexus that persisted despite the absence of anyone to actively maintain it. The place where Exar had performed his final ritual, where he had sacrificed thousands of Masasi to preserve his spirit, was particularly potent. Dark side energy had soaked into the stone there, creating a wound in the Force that would never fully heal. Any Force sensitive who approached that location felt it. A pull, a wrongness, a sense that something terrible had happened here, and its echo continued to reverberate across time. The galaxy continued its cycles. The Jedi Civil War erupted 40 years after Exar's defeat, when Revan and Malak fell to the dark side and nearly destroyed the Republic. 300 years later, the Sith Empire that had been hiding in the unknown regions finally returned, led by the immortal Sith Emperor Vitiate. Wars came and went. The Jedi Order was destroyed and rebuilt multiple times. Through it all, Exar's spirit remained on Yavin 4, trapped but enduring, waiting for circumstances that might finally give him another chance at freedom or power or revenge. Then came the Clone Wars, followed by the rise of Darth Sidious and his galactic empire. The Jedi Order was destroyed yet again, this time more thoroughly than ever before. Only a handful of Jedi survived the purge, scattered and hiding across the galaxy. Among them was a young man from Tatooine named Luke Skywalker, who would eventually help destroy the Empire and attempt to rebuild what had been lost. And that attempt would bring Luke to Yavin 4, would bring him to the exact location where Exar Kun waited, and would finally give the ancient Sith Lord the opportunity he had been denied for 4 millennia. The rebellion had established a base in the Great Temple on Yavin 4, the same massive pyramid that Exar had used as his center of power. The rebels had no idea of the location's dark history. They knew the temples had been built by an ancient culture, but the specifics had been lost to time. They converted the temple into a military headquarters, installed equipment and weapons, and used it to coordinate their attack on the Death Star. When that attack succeeded, when Luke Skywalker destroyed the Empire's ultimate weapon, the rebellion celebrated their victory in the temple, where Exar Kun's spirit had witnessed everything. Exar sensed Luke immediately. Here was a Force-sensitive, untrained but powerful, with potential that rivaled anything Exar had seen during his own lifetime. More importantly, Luke carried within him darkness, the shadow of Darth Vader, the legacy of his Skywalker bloodline, the seeds of anger and fear that exist in all beings. Exar reached out tentatively, carefully, testing Luke's defenses, but Luke departed Yavin 4 before Exar could establish any real connection. The rebellion abandoned their base, and the temple fell silent once more. Exar returned to his dormant state, but now with something he hadn't felt in millennia: hope. Years passed. The Empire fell. Darth Vader and Darth Sidious both died. Luke Skywalker began gathering Force sensitives to rebuild the Jedi Order. And when Luke needed a location for his new Jedi Academy, a place strong in the Force where he could train students, he remembered Yavin 4, the moon, where the rebellion had achieved its first major victory, seemed perfect, isolated enough for training, but with facilities already in place from the old base. Luke returned to Yavin 4 and established his Jedi Praxium in the Great Temple, bringing with him 12 students, the first members of his new Jedi Order. When Luke and his students arrived, when they began living in the temple and meditating in chambers where Exar had once performed dark rituals, the ancient Sith Lord woke fully for the first time in 4,000 years. He could feel their presence, sense their thoughts, touch their dreams. These were Jedi, or would-be Jedi, precisely the sort of victims he needed. They were powerful enough in the Force to be useful, but inexperienced enough to be vulnerable. And their master, this Luke Skywalker, was himself still learning, still figuring out what it meant to be a Jedi in an age when the Order had been destroyed. Exar began his campaign of corruption carefully. He didn't announce himself or attack directly. Instead, he appeared in dreams, subtle at first, planting ideas and suggestions that seemed to come from the dreamers' own minds. He focused his initial efforts on Gantoris, a student from the planet Eosha, who had shown remarkable Force potential, but also carried deep anger about the suffering his people had endured. Gantoris began dreaming of a dark figure who offered him power, who showed him techniques beyond what Luke was teaching, who promised that with the right knowledge, Gantoris could protect his people from ever suffering again. Gantoris responded to Exar's manipulation exactly as the Sith Lord had hoped. The young student sought more power, pushed harder in training, and began to feel frustrated with Luke's cautious approach to teaching. Why couldn't Luke simply show them everything immediately? Why hold back knowledge when the galaxy was still dangerous, when threats remained? Exar encouraged these thoughts, fed Gantoris' impatience, and gradually led him toward dark side techniques that Luke had deliberately not taught. The corruption process accelerated when Gantoris, driven by Exar's influence, constructed his own lightsaber without waiting for Luke's permission or guidance. This should have been a milestone in Gantoris' training, a sign of progress. Instead, the lightsaber Gantoris built was flawed, unstable, dangerous to its user. Exar had subtly influenced the construction, ensuring the weapon would serve his purposes. When Gantoris activated his lightsaber for the first time, Exar's presence poured through it, completing the connection between the ancient Sith Lord and his first modern victim. Gantoris, suddenly aware that he had been manipulated, that the dark figure in his dreams was real and had been using him, tried to resist. He rejected Exar's teachings, attempted to warn Luke about the presence he had sensed, but Exar couldn't allow that. He had invested too much energy in corrupting Gantoris to let him escape or expose the plan. In a chamber of the Great Temple, away from the other students, Exar manifested fully for the first time in millennia. His spirit appeared before Gantoris as a figure of shadow and malevolence, and with a gesture, Exar killed him. The murder was impossible to hide. Gantoris's body was found the next morning, burned by dark side energy, his face frozen in an expression of terror. Luke investigated Gantoris's death, sensed the dark side presence that had been responsible, but couldn't identify its source. He warned his students to be careful, to meditate on the light side, to resist any temptations or strange influences they might encounter. But Luke himself didn't fully understand what he was dealing with. He had never heard of Exar Kun, had no knowledge of the temple's history, had no way to know that a Sith Lord from 4,000 years ago was actively working to destroy his Jedi Academy from within. With Gantoris dead, but the corruption begun, Exar turned his attention to another student. Kyp Durran was perhaps the most naturally gifted Force user Luke had found. His potential was extraordinary, possibly even exceeding Luke's own. But Kyp carried his own darkness, trauma from years enslaved in the spice mines of Kessel, anger at the Empire that had destroyed his family, and impatience with the slow pace of Jedi training. Exar recognized in Kyp a mind and heart perfectly suited to corruption. Exar appeared to Kyp in visions and dreams, but unlike with Gantoris, he was more direct. He identified himself as Exar Kun, an ancient Jedi master whose knowledge had been suppressed by a fearful Jedi council. He claimed that Luke, though well-intentioned, was holding his students back out of ignorance, teaching them only a fraction of what the Force could do. Exar offered to teach Kyp everything, to unlock his full potential, to make him powerful enough to protect the galaxy from threats Luke was too weak to face. The manipulation worked perfectly. Kyp began studying in secret with Exar, learning techniques that rapidly accelerated his growth in the Force. But these weren't Jedi techniques. They were Sith techniques, fueled by emotion and aggression. Kyp's power grew dramatically, but so did his arrogance and his belief that he knew better than Luke what the galaxy needed. When Admiral Dala, one of the Empire's last remaining commanders, attacked with her fleet, Kyp became convinced that the only way to stop her was through overwhelming force, through using power that Luke was too cautious to employ. Under Exar's guidance, Kyp did something that demonstrated just how far he had fallen. He used the Force to raise the Sun Crusher from the gas giant Yavin, where it had been hidden after being captured from the Empire. The Sun Crusher was a super weapon, a small ship with nearly indestructible armor and resonance torpedoes that could make stars explode. With this weapon and Exar's teachings, Kyp declared himself a Dark Lord of the Sith and set out to destroy the Empire once and for all, no matter the cost. When Luke confronted Kyp, tried to stop him from this dark path, Exar intervened directly. Channeling power through Kyp, using the amulets and artifacts stored in the temple to amplify his abilities, Exar attacked Luke's spirit. The assault was devastating and precise. Exar literally tore Luke's soul from his body, leaving Luke in a coma while his spirit drifted helplessly in the Force. Kyp departed Yavin 4 with the Sun Crusher, and for the first time in 4,000 years, Exar Kun felt like he might actually achieve victory. But Luke's students, though young and inexperienced, were not helpless. They recognized that something was wrong with their master, that his coma was not natural. They banded together to protect Luke's body while searching for a way to help his spirit return. And in doing so, they began to sense the true nature of the threat they faced. The dark presence that had killed Gantoris, that had corrupted Kip, that had attacked Luke, it wasn't some external enemy. It was here, in the temple with them, had been here all along. Exar recognized the danger these students represented. If they united against him, if they worked together to resist his influence, they might actually be able to harm him or trap him more completely than he already was. He needed to divide them, to make them fear each other, to prevent them from mounting any organized defense. Exar began appearing to the students individually, taking different forms, showing each of them visions designed to terrify and confuse. He appeared to young Jacen Solo, only 3 years old, trying to frighten the child. He attempted to turn Streen, an old man from Bespin, into a weapon to kill Luke's comatose body. But something unexpected happened. The students, instead of turning on each other, instead of fleeing in panic, grew stronger together. Jacen Solo, though just a child, picked up a lightsaber and defended himself. Streen resisted Exar's control and woke from the trance before committing murder. Other students, Chilgal, Dorsk 81, Kirana T, all rallied together, combining their abilities and their willpower. They began actively seeking Exar's spirit, trying to find where he hid so they could confront him directly. The confrontation came in the central chamber of the Great Temple. Exar manifested before all the students, appearing as a towering shadow surrounded by dark side energy. He mocked them, told them they were too weak to stop him, that even their master had fallen before his power. But the students had discovered something in the temple archives, a holocron containing a recording of Vodo Siosk Bas. Luke had found it during the raid on Ossus 4,000 years earlier, and it had been brought to Yavin 4 without anyone realizing its significance. When the holocron was activated, Vodo Siosk Bas's spirit appeared alongside Luke's spirit, which had been fighting to return to his body. The old Krevaki master, who had promised at his death that he would one day defeat Exar Kun, had kept his word. His spirit had endured across 4 millennia, waiting for exactly this moment. Bas joined with Luke and the students in a combined assault on Exar's spirit, attacking with the light side of the Force, with love and hope and determination. The battle was fought not with lightsabers or physical weapons, but with pure will. Exar tried to defend himself, tried to maintain his hold on the temple and the dark side nexus he had created there, but he was facing something he had never truly encountered during his life. Not individuals, not separate Force users, but a group united in purpose, their combined strength exponentially greater than the sum of its parts. The students formed a wall of light, a barrier of pure Force energy that pushed back against darkness. Vodo Siosk Bas spoke to his former student one final time. He told Exar that this was the end, that the darkness would finally be banished, that 4,000 years of waiting had led to this moment of justice. Then, with Luke's spirit adding its power, and all the students channeling everything they had, they struck. The light side assault shattered Exar's spirit, like glass struck by a hammer. The dark presence that had haunted Yavin 4 for 4 millennia was torn apart and scattered, destroyed so completely that nothing remained, not even echoes. The temple shook as Exar's spirit was annihilated. Dark side energy that had saturated the stone for centuries was suddenly released, creating storms across the moon, causing structures to collapse, reshaping the landscape itself. When it was over, when the light faded and the students could see again, Luke's spirit had returned to his body. He woke from his coma, weak but alive. Kip Durin, freed from Exar's influence but still bearing responsibility for his actions, would eventually return and begin the long process of redemption. Exar Kun, the Dark Lord of the Sith, who had nearly conquered the galaxy 4,000 years earlier, who had survived death itself to wait for another chance at power, was finally and completely destroyed. the threat he represented was ended. The students who had defeated him would go on to become the foundation of Luke's new Jedi Order, stronger for having faced and overcome such terrible darkness. In the aftermath, Luke had the temples on Yavin 4 extensively investigated. He learned the full history of Exar Kun, discovered records that explained what had happened there 4,000 years ago, understood finally what he and his students had been facing. The knowledge was sobering. They had come incredibly close to disaster, had nearly lost everything to a threat they hadn't even known existed until it was almost too late. The story of Exar Kun, from his beginning as a promising Jedi Padawan to his end as a destroyed spirit, spans more than 4,000 years. It's a story about pride and ambition, about the seductive nature of power, about the thin line between confidence and arrogance. Exar's fall began not with some dramatic betrayal or terrible trauma, but with simple impatience, with a belief that he deserved more than his teachers were willing to give, with the conviction that rules meant for others didn't apply to someone as exceptional as him. His journey to the dark side was incremental. Each step seemed justified in the moment. Accessing forbidden knowledge, surely understanding the enemy was wise. Leaving the Jedi Order, if they wouldn't teach him, he would teach himself. Seeking Freedon Nad's tomb, just to learn, just to understand. Accepting Nad as a teacher, temporarily, just until he gained what he needed. Embracing the dark side on Korriban, only because it was necessary to survive. Each choice made the next choice easier. Each compromise made the next compromise seem smaller, until Exar had traveled so far down that path that he couldn't see the light anymore. The techniques and innovations Exar Kun introduced to Sith practice would persist long after his destruction. The double-bladed lightsaber, which he created based on ancient Sith designs, would be rediscovered and used by later dark side users, most famously by Darth Maul during the Clone Wars era. The philosophy of the Brotherhood of the Sith, which emphasized corrupting existing Force users rather than training new ones from childhood, would influence Sith thinking for generations. His understanding that power came not just from individual strength, but from building organizations and networks. That too would echo through Sith history. But perhaps Exar Kun's most important legacy was as a warning. The Jedi who studied his life saw clearly the danger of pride, the necessity of accepting guidance even when you believe you've surpassed your teachers, the importance of humility in the face of powers that transcend individual comprehension. Exar had been extraordinarily talented, genuinely brilliant, possessed of abilities that would have made him one of the greatest Jedi who ever lived. But talent alone, skill alone, even wisdom alone, are not enough if they're not grounded in something larger than the self. The ancient Sith Lord Marka Ragnos had seen potential in Exar Kun, had designated him Dark Lord of the Sith, and prophesied that through him, the Sith would never die. In a certain sense, Ragnos was right. The ideas Exar developed, the techniques he perfected, the approach to power he embodied, all of it lived on. Every Sith Lord who came after him, from Darth Revan to Darth Bane to Darth Sidious, stood in Exar's shadow, building on foundations he had laid. Yet in another sense, Ragnos was completely wrong. Exar Kun was destroyed utterly. His spirit was annihilated. His name became a byword for failure and hubris. The empire he built lasted barely a year before collapsing. The Brotherhood of the Sith he formed scattered and died. Everything he worked to achieve came to nothing. The galaxy he wanted to rule forgot him. The legacy he wanted to establish was reduced to cautionary tales told to Jedi students. There's a deeper irony in Exar's story. He fell to the dark side because he believed he was exceptional, that ordinary limitations didn't apply to him, that he could use dark side power without being corrupted by it. But in the end, Exar's story is depressingly ordinary. He followed the exact same path as countless dark side users before and after him. his fall, his reasoning, his justifications, his eventual destruction. All of it was predictable, almost stereotypical. The very exceptionalism that drove him to darkness proved to be an illusion. He wasn't special. He was just another talented person who let pride destroy them. If Exar Kun could have seen the full arc of his existence, from his birth on a core world to his final destruction on Yavin 4, would he have made different choices? Would he have listened to Vodo Siaskbas, heeded Master Arca Jeth's warnings, turned away from Friedan Nad's tomb? We can't know. What we do know is that at every critical juncture, Exar chose power over wisdom, ambition over humility, the quick path over the right path. And those choices, accumulated over time, defined him more than any inherent talent or potential ever could. The temples on Yavin 4 still stand, though they're now carefully monitored by the new Jedi Order. The dark side nexus Exar created has faded, but not disappeared entirely. Force sensitives who visit the moon can still feel echoes of what happened there, can sense the residual energy from battles fought 4,000 years ago, and from the final confrontation that ended Exar's threat. The moon serves as a reminder, a physical monument to the dangers of the dark side and the importance of remaining vigilant against corruption. In the archives of the new Jedi Order, students study Exar Kun's life in detail. They examine his early training under Vodo Siaskbas, analyze the warning signs that his teachers missed or chose to ignore, discuss the moments when intervention might have made a difference. They study his techniques not to replicate them, but to understand them, to recognize when similar patterns might be emerging in themselves or their fellow students. The goal isn't to demonize Exar or reduce him to a simple villain, but to understand him as a complex person who made terrible choices. Some students, studying Exar's story, are struck by how relatable parts of it are. The desire to learn faster, to access knowledge that seems arbitrarily restricted, to prove oneself exceptional, these are feelings most Force sensitives experience at some point in their training. The difference between a Jedi and a fallen Jedi isn't the absence of these feelings, but what you do with them, whether you recognize them as temptations to be acknowledged and released, rather than truths to be embraced and followed. Other students focus on the tragic elements of Exar's story. He was failed by his teachers in some ways. Vodo Siaskbas, for all his wisdom, perhaps should have been stricter, should have set clearer boundaries, should have found ways to challenge Exar's pride before it became toxic. The Jedi Council, by restricting access to knowledge about the dark side, may have made that knowledge seem more appealing, more forbidden fruit, that ambitious students naturally wanted to taste. There are lessons here not just for students, but for teachers, about the balance between guidance and control, between protection and preparation. Luke Skywalker himself spent considerable time reflecting on Exar Kun after the Spirit's destruction. Luke had nearly lost everything to a threat he hadn't anticipated, hadn't prepared his students to face. It forced him to reconsider his approach to building the new Jedi Order. Perhaps the old Order's secrecy about dark side knowledge had been counterproductive. Perhaps students needed to understand temptation to resist it, needed to know the arguments that dark side users would make, so they could recognize and reject them when those arguments arose in their own minds. The Jedi historian Tian Salusar composed a ballad about Exar Kun, a musical account of his rise and fall that she performed for students at the academy. The ballad didn't glorify him, but didn't completely condemn him either. It presented Exar as he was, a brilliant student whose potential was real, but whose character flaws were equally real and ultimately determinative. The ballad ended not with Exar's destruction, but with Vodo Siaskbas's promise to one day return and see his student defeated, a reminder that love and commitment to the light can persist even through death, even across millennia. In the broader galaxy, among those who aren't Force sensitive and don't study Jedi history, Exar Kun remains largely unknown. There are too many crises, too many threats, too many dramatic events for people to remember everything. The average citizen of the New Republic, asked about ancient Sith Lords, might mention Darth Revan if they know their history well, might vaguely recall hearing about the old Sith Wars, but probably wouldn't know the name Exar Kun. In that anonymity, there's perhaps a final irony. The Dark Lord who wanted to be remembered forever, who sacrificed thousands and waged war across the galaxy to build a lasting legacy, has been largely forgotten, except by scholars and those who must study such things as part of their training. Yet in the Force itself, in the deep currents of power that flow through all living things, Exar Kun's impact persists. The dark side nexus on Yavin 4, though weakened, changed the Force in that location permanently. The techniques he developed, the innovations he introduced, the corruption he spread, all of it rippled outward through time, influencing events in ways both subtle and profound. You cannot unleash that much darkness, cannot pour that much ambition and hatred and will into the Force without leaving permanent marks. The Great Sith War that Exar led, brief as it was, killed millions. Worlds were scorched, populations were decimated. The Jedi Order was weakened, losing many of its wisest masters and most promising students. The Republic's economy and military were severely damaged. The conflict created power vacuums and instabilities that would contribute to later crises, creating chains of causation that stretched across centuries. If you trace the causes of the Jedi Civil War, or the eventual rise of the Sith Empire from the unknown regions, you find threads that lead back to destabilization caused by Exar Kun's campaigns. In that sense, Exar Kun achieved more than he could have imagined. Not the empire he wanted, not the lasting Sith dominance he fought for, but chaos and suffering that echoed long after his destruction. It's a dark legacy, one that raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of historical responsibility and the long-term consequences of individual actions. There's also the question of what Exar might have been if he had remained with the Jedi. His potential was genuine. His intelligence was real. His abilities were exceptional. If he had learned patience, if he had accepted guidance, if he had channeled his ambition into service rather than domination, what might he have accomplished? He could have been one of the greatest Jedi Masters, could have trained generations of students, could have helped maintain peace across the galaxy for decades, or even centuries. That potential was wasted, thrown away for power that ultimately destroyed him. The tragedy of Exar Kun isn't that he was evil from birth or irredeemably corrupted. The tragedy is that he chose to become what he became. At every step, he had alternatives. He could have stayed with Vodos Yoskbas. He could have heeded Arkajeth's warnings on Onderon. He could have fled when Freedon Nad's spirit revealed its true intentions. He could have resisted on Korriban instead of embracing the dark side. He could have stopped when he first took lives, when he first felt the corruption changing him. He never did. He always chose the next step deeper into darkness, always convinced himself that this time would be different, that he was in control, that the power was worth the price. In teaching about Exar Kun, Jedi instructors emphasized that the dark side doesn't announce itself as evil. It presents itself as power, as knowledge, as the means to accomplish good ends. It whispers that you're special, that you can handle what others couldn't, that the rules were made for lesser beings. It makes you feel strong while slowly making you weak, makes you feel wise while slowly making you foolish, makes you feel free while slowly enslaving you. Exar fell for all of it, and he fell so gradually that by the time he realized what had happened, it was too late. The final confrontation between Exar's spirit and Luke's students has become a touchstone in Jedi teaching. It demonstrates that the light side, when multiple Jedi work in harmony, can overcome even the most powerful darkness. It shows that training isn't just about individual strength, but about learning to cooperate, to trust others, to combine efforts toward common purpose. The students who defeated Exar weren't exceptionally powerful as individuals. Indeed, they were still learning, still developing their abilities, but together, united in their commitment to the light and their care for each other, they accomplished what even Luke Skywalker alone could not. Vodosiask Basa's role in that final battle is particularly significant. The old Jedi Master, who had died 4,000 years earlier, unable to stop his students' fall, had persisted as a spirit specifically to fulfill his promise. He had waited millennia for the chance to help defeat Exar, had endured, when easier paths would have been to simply fade into the Force and find peace. His dedication to justice, his love for his fallen student even in the face of Exar's betrayal and murderous actions, his refusal to give up even across impossible spans of time, these are qualities the new Jedi Order holds up as ideals. The destruction of Exar Kun's spirit was final and complete. There will be no further returns, no secret contingencies allowing him to manifest again. The techniques he used to preserve himself were shattered. The nexus that anchored him was cleansed. Whatever consciousness or personality comprised Exar Kun was dispersed beyond any possibility of recovery or reconstruction. In that sense, his story has a definitive ending, unlike some dark side users whose influence or spirit might persist in various forms. Yet stories never truly end. They continue in the lessons they teach, in the people they influence, in the patterns they reveal. Exar Kun's story continues every time a Jedi student feels the pull of ambition and chooses humility instead. It continues every time a teacher recognizes warning signs in a student and intervenes before corruption takes hold. It continues every time someone acknowledges the darkness within themselves and chooses to face it rather than embrace it. In the history of the galaxy, in the long chronicle of conflict between light and dark, Exar Kun is a significant but ultimately failed experiment. The dark side ran through him completely, gave him extraordinary power, used him to inflict tremendous suffering, and then, like every dark side user before and after, he was destroyed. Not slowly, not gently, but utterly. The dark side consumed him as it consumes everyone who gives themselves to it fully. The only variable is how long the consumption takes, and how much damage the person does to others before their inevitable end. This is perhaps the final lesson of Exar Kun's life. The dark side makes promises it cannot keep. It promises power, but that power is temporary and unstable. It promises freedom, but it leads to slavery. It promises to elevate you above others, but it ultimately reduces you to nothing. Every Sith Lord learns this eventually. Some, like Ulic Qel-Droma, learn it in time to seek redemption. Others, like Exar Kun, learn it too late and are destroyed. But none escape learning it. The dark side has no loyal servants, only victims who haven't yet realized they're doomed. As the decades pass after his destruction, as Luke's new Jedi Order grows and matures, as new students come to Yavin 4 to train in the same temples where Exar once ruled, his name becomes less immediate threat and more historical footnote. The students walk through chambers where he performed dark rituals. They meditate in spaces where his spirit once lurked. But now those spaces are filled with light, reclaimed and rededicated to Jedi purposes. The darkness that Exar brought to Yavin 4 has been overcome, not by destroying the temples, but by filling them with something better. In the end, that may be the most important lesson. Darkness can be overcome not just by fighting it, but by replacing it with light. The temples stood for 4,000 years, saturated with dark side energy. They could have been destroyed, reduced to rubble, eliminated as threats. Instead, they were reclaimed. They were filled with Jedi students learning and growing, with meditation and training, with laughter and hope. The same stones that once channeled Sith power now serve the light. The same spaces where Exar once plotted conquest now nurture the next generation of guardians. Exar Kun wanted to be remembered forever, wanted his name to echo through eternity. In a sense, he achieved that goal. His name is remembered, his story is told, his life is studied. But he's remembered as a cautionary tale, a warning, an example of what not to do and who not to become. That's not the legacy he wanted. He wanted to be remembered as a conqueror, as the Dark Lord who restored the Sith to glory, as the visionary who rebuilt civilization on Sith principles. Instead, he's remembered as a talented student who threw away everything good in his life for power that ultimately meant nothing. The galaxy is safer for his destruction. The Force is cleaner for his spirit's annihilation. The Jedi Order is wiser for having studied his fall and learned from it. Exar Kun is gone, completely and finally gone, and the galaxy is better for it. For those who seek to understand the nature of the Force, who study the eternal conflict between light and dark, Exar Kun's story provides crucial insights. He was not unique in falling to the dark side. Thousands have made that journey. He was not unique in his power. Many Sith Lords have matched or exceeded his abilities. What makes his story instructive is how completely it demonstrates the standard pattern of corruption, the predictable stages of fall, the inevitable consequences of choosing darkness. First comes pride, the belief in one's own exceptionalism. Then comes the desire for knowledge or power that seems unreasonably restricted. Then comes the first compromise, the first justifiable violation of principles. Then comes deeper involvement with darkness, each step justified by previous steps. Then comes the point of no return, when corruption has progressed so far that the person can't perceive how far they've fallen. Then comes the exercise of dark power, the infliction of suffering, the commission of acts that would have horrified the person they used to be. And finally comes destruction, either through death, utter defeat, or, rarely, recognition of what they've become, and genuine repentance. Exar Kun followed this pattern perfectly, almost textbook in its progression. A Jedi instructor teaching about the dangers of the dark side could map Exar's journey step by step, and show students exactly how each stage leads to the next, how the logic of corruption unfolds, how someone intelligent and talented can nevertheless end up completely lost. That predictability is itself instructive. The dark side isn't creative. It doesn't offer unique paths for special people. It uses the same strategies again and again because they work. Pride, ambition, resentment, fear, these are the tools of corruption, and they work on everyone who opens themselves to them. Understanding this pattern is crucial for Jedi training. Students need to recognize these stages not just in historical figures, but in themselves, in their own thoughts and feelings. When that voice whispers that you're special, that you can handle what others can't, that the rules don't fully apply to you, that's the first stage of corruption beginning. When you feel resentment that teachers won't give you knowledge immediately, when you start to feel entitled to power, that's the second stage establishing itself. Recognizing these patterns early, while they're still just thoughts and feelings rather than actions, is the key to preventing falls like Exar's. The new Jedi Order, learning from both ancient mistakes and recent near disasters, has developed more sophisticated approaches to preventing students from falling to the dark side. They're more open about discussing dark side temptations, more willing to acknowledge that every Jedi struggles with these feelings, more focused on helping students develop internal resistance, rather than relying entirely on external rules and restrictions. They teach about historical figures like Exar Kun, not to inspire fear, but to inspire awareness, to help students recognize in themselves the thoughts and patterns that have led others to darkness. This approach isn't perfect. No system can prevent every fall, can guarantee that every student will remain true to the light. But it's better than the old order's approach, which relied heavily on secrecy and which assumed that if students weren't exposed to knowledge of the dark side, they wouldn't be tempted by it. Exar Kun's fall demonstrated the failure of that approach. He sought dark side knowledge precisely because it was forbidden, because the restriction itself made it seem more valuable and important than it actually was. As we reach the end of Exar Kun's story, as we stand in the present looking back across 4,000 years of history, certain truths become clear. Power without wisdom is dangerous. Talent without humility is destructive. Ambition without ethics is monstrous. These aren't just abstract principles. They're lessons written in the lives and deaths of real beings, lessons purchased at tremendous cost in suffering and blood. Exar Kun paid for his choices with everything. He lost his humanity, lost his freedom, lost his very existence. He threw away love, friendship, purpose, meaning, everything that makes life worth living, in pursuit of power that ultimately destroyed him. And in the process, he caused immeasurable suffering to millions of beings who never knew his name, never understood why their lives were destroyed, never had any say in the conflicts that swept over them. That's perhaps the final tragedy of Exar Kun's story. He thought it was about him, about his destiny, about his rightful place as a being of power and significance. But really, it was just another example of the same old pattern, the same temptations and corruptions that have played out countless times throughout galactic history. He wasn't special. He was just another talented person who let pride destroy them. And the galaxy would have been far better off if he had simply remained a good Jedi, serving others, rather than becoming a Dark Lord serving only himself. The temples on Yavin 4 stand as monuments to this truth. They were built to channel dark power, to corrupt and dominate. Now they channel light, helping new generations of Jedi learn and grow. The transformation isn't just symbolic. It's real, measurable, significant, and it demonstrates a truth more fundamental than any Sith philosophy. Light endures where darkness fails. Service builds where domination destroys. Love creates where hatred consumes. Exar Kun learned these truths too late. By the time he understood what he had become, what he had lost, what he had wasted, there was no path back to redemption. He died unredeemed, and his spirit was destroyed, unrepentant. But we who study his life need not repeat his mistakes. We can learn from his fall without experiencing it ourselves. We can understand the patterns of corruption without falling victim to them. We can choose differently every day, in large decisions and small, in moments of temptation and moments of crisis. That is Exar Kun's true legacy. Not the power he wielded, not the war he waged, not the empire he briefly built, but the lesson his story teaches. We are all capable of falling. We all face temptation. We all have pride and ambition, and the desire to be special. What matters is what we do with those feelings, whether we recognize them as obstacles to overcome, rather than as truths to embrace, whether we seek power or wisdom, whether we serve ourselves or something greater. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the history of Exar Kun, one of the most powerful and tragic figures in Star Wars history, please consider subscribing to the channel. There are countless more stories to explore in the rich history of the Sith and the Jedi, from ancient Dark Lords to the conflicts that shaped the galaxy. May the Force be with you, always.